right, we are live. Okay, well, thanks for being here, everybody. I'm still getting used to doing a live thing with YouTube. YouTube is a new, or at least YouTube Live is new for me still. But we're gonna see how this goes. I think it should be really great. You should have a chat option over on the side. As people are still coming into here, I'd like to just cover a little bit about what we're going to be teaching, what we're going to be going over. If you're here, you're getting started with Canvas apps, right? Hey, good morning. I'm excited to keep looking at the chat and see any questions you guys have. All right, let's go over the little housekeeping things really quick. So, lots of Canvas apps are being built. So we have lots of different. I talk to lots of different people all the time. They are wondering about AI, right? We're wondering how is AI going to play a role into everything, and I want to start by saying Canvas apps is still a very, very good skill to know. Lots of the companies that I work with, they are building Canvas apps still. They're building more Canvas apps than they have before, and it's such a good skill to learn. I'd also like to mention that when I first started learning Canvas apps, I just tried to watch a bunch of YouTube videos. I think I watched like 3 months of YouTube videos, right? So it was hard. And YouTube is so great. I love YouTube. But when you're first learning with Canvas apps, it's really hard to piece those videos together. And so, what I always wanted while I was eating potato chips, watching all these YouTube videos, was just for someone to build out an app from start to finish. And so, that's what we're going to be doing today. It's going to be a pretty basic app. I don't want to, there's so much to learn in Canvas apps. So I don't want to overwhelm you either, but I want to start out with a really good foundational knowledge of the main pieces of building an app. So it should be really great. The last little things before we get started, we're not going to have like a dedicated time for Q&A at the very end. You can totally always email me a question if you have, or if you're coming from LinkedIn, you can send me a LinkedIn message. I do try to eventually respond. Sometimes it takes me a little bit to respond, but I do try to respond to comments on videos, LinkedIn messages, sending me an email, right? If you have a question with things. So if you don't feel like you got your question answered, no, you can still reach out to me, but I will try to keep an eye out on the chat. I might ask you to say, give me a thumbs up if this is making sense or things like that. Hey, I'm glad you're excited. That's awesome. The last couple things here. So this is important. While we're building out this basic app, I'd actually recommend that you just focus on watching and learning, right? If you're really brand new, just watch and just learn. Don't worry about trying to build it along with me. This is recorded, so it'll be available for at least a week for you to watch afterwards. So I would first focus on just watching it and learning things. And then if you want, you can go back, watch the recording, and try to build the app along with me, and that way you can kind of fast forward or go back and rewatch a piece if it didn't quite make sense, right? So that's how I'd actually recommend doing this. If you try to build an app while I'm building it too, you can just get going off on the wild blue yonder and start trying to learn other things, and before you know it, then we're 10 minutes ahead. And anyway, so I thought I'd mention that. I think that is about it. The last thing I'll say is I hurt my back. I'm getting older, so you're getting older when you hurt your back by like getting the groceries out of the car, which I think is what happened. So it's not from mountain biking or doing something cool. It was just getting the groceries out of the car. So if I collapse on the floor, that's probably why. Somehow my back is hurting. But good thing I have this job where I can just sit in my chair. So that's good. All right, I'm going to share my screen here. Let's get situated here. All right. And yes, there we go. Okay, awesome. All right, there we go. So I've made the screen a little bit bigger so you can see it a little bit better. YouTube Live is interesting because it's putting me in the bottom right corner, but that's all right. I'll move things around. If I'm ever in the way, just put something on the chat. You can let me know. All right, so today we're going to be building out a task management app, and we're first going to come to what is called the App Maker Studio. So I'll do a little tutorial on how the app editor actually works. But before we even get into the app editor, here we are on powerapps.com. So if you go to make.powerapps.com, you can sign in, right? You probably need a license to do that if you don't have one already. But Power Apps, it's very similar if you've used Power Automate, right? If you're in the Microsoft world, there's a lot of stuff, right? There's so many things, there's so many ways to create an app and to view your different apps and view all the different things going on. So this can feel a little bit overwhelming if you're just getting started. Right here, I can see some of the apps that I've created just in my little environment here. But you can also see up here, there's a few different ways to create an app. You can start from a plan, kind of to plan out your app first. You start from more of a design, so it's like a predetermined layout. I like to really compare this to PowerPoint, right? You can start from like a template or a certain type of design and then customize it afterwards. We're going to build it from scratch, but I thought I'd mention that here at least. And we won't go over everything in here, but there are some things that are really helpful to know about. So be sure to check these out. You can even click on more, and they have even more stuff to learn. So there's really so much to learn here. And of course, you can always go to the Learn tab right here as well. That can give you some little tutorials and things like that as well. So let's go here to Create. And right, so we can choose all these different types. We're just doing Canvas apps today. So here's model driven right here, right? And then here's Canvas apps right here. So we could start from like a predetermined template, which can be super helpful. But since we're just getting started, we're just going to do the create from blank. So I'll click right here. Now, we used to not have this option. This is pretty cool, but we now have the option to build a responsive, like start from a responsive template, right? So that's pretty cool. This does make it a little bit more complex. So we won't cover that today. That is like a whole other training on its own, I feel like, to do responsive, which means it's going to work on your desktop, it's going to work on your iPad, and it's going to work on your phone, right? The app is resizing based off of the screen size. Super awesome that it does that. But today, since we're just learning, we're going to do the tablet size. Here we go here. Just going to load, get things going for us. All right, so it's going to try to give us lots of different little tips. I'm just going to say, don't show me this again. Hit skip. And here we are in the app editor. So this, I already mentioned it. I really like comparing this to PowerPoint. I think of this, an app, or at least a Canvas app, as creating a PowerPoint presentation. You have slides. Each slide is like a certain thing that you're talking about or a certain screen in your app, and that is meant to do something, right? This screen is all about viewing data, or this screen or slide, right, is all about submitting a form, whatever it is. And so you can see, just like in PowerPoint, I've got my main slide or my main screen here, as they're called in Canvas apps. And I can also add more screens. So if I come over here, I see I just have one screen in my app. And if I'd like, I can add other screens. So I can come over here And I can add a blank screen, very similar to PowerPoint. I can add other templates, right? They have a lot of really cool screens. I recommend trying these out, maybe not right now, but trying these out at some point to see, oh, hey, there's a predetermined or a pre-created calendar screen. So if you're needing a calendar, you can try to utilize that. These can be really helpful, especially when you're trying to learn how things work. But if I wanted to add another screen, I could do that. I could click on adding a blank screen. But let's look at some of the other things in here. So, and again, there's so many things, right? We'll cover lots of these pieces. I want to make you feel like you feel like you know the foundations of how this whole studio works. You don't have to know everything, but you can know the key important pieces to it. And we will cover more and more. So if you're seeing all these things on the side or all these things up above, we're definitely going to be using lots of these pieces throughout the course. So I'm not going to cover everything right now, but let's go ahead and add in some controls. So when you add like a label or a date picker or a form or things like that, those are called controls inside of Canvas apps. And to view the list of controls, I can come up here and click on Insert. And I can see all these different controls right here. So there's lots of different types. I have input controls for inputting data. I have display controls. Some of these I haven't even used, to be honest. There's so many of them here. Media, these are some of the really cool things about Power Apps is you can leverage a microphone or a barcode reader, your camera, right? You can do lots of really cool stuff. I've seen people do lots of really cool stuff with this. Even have a map. That's pretty awesome. So there's lots of different ways lots of different controls that you can add to your Canvas app. Over here, if I go to the Insert tab, I can see that same list of options. So I can come up here or I can go over here. So same thing. So let's go ahead and we are going to add a label. Let's add a little text label right here. Now I will mention that we are using what's called the classic controls. So they've been trying to implement more modern controls that look a lot more like Microsoft and are a little bit fancier. They work very similarly to the classic controls. They just look better. Since we don't really need them for this beginner training, I won't use them right now. But if you want to look at the more fancier controls, I thought I'd mention this really quick. You can come up here to these three dots, go over to settings, and go over here to updates, and then hit this toggle to turn on modern controls and themes. And right here, while we're looking at it, here's where you can add or you can turn off or on or configure lots of different little settings inside your app. All right, so let's go right here. So now I've added a control just like PowerPoint. I can drag this around. I can resize it. I can change the color of it. So I can do that up here and change the font and things like that once I've got it selected. You can also see that I've selected it over here. It's grayed out, whatever I've selected. And over here are the properties about my control. So every control has different properties. Lots of them have the same properties, right? Like the color or the width of it and things like that. But this label property has a property called text. So if I wanted to change what the text was in here, I could come over here and say hello, and then that goes ahead and changes it right there. So now that's saying hello. The other thing that I can do with these properties is I can actually customize them right up here. Here's where it's more like Excel. I have a list with the control selected, so that's important. I have a list of all the different properties for that control. So if you ever want to just look at, hey, what are all the customizable things for the control I've selected, you can come to this drop down right here and look through all of these. And if I wanted to go to the width, for example, I could come right here and click width, and then I can change that right here. So instead of 710 pixels, I could say this is 500 pixels, and then that reduces the width there, right? Like just like that. Now let's go ahead and add in a different control. So we're going to add in a text input control. So the label is just displaying text, right? So now let's go ahead and add in a control that we can actually do something with. So we'll do text input. This one is like, right, like a search bar, or you're entering text for a form or something like that, right? So that's what this control is for. And it has similar properties as the label, but they'll be a little bit different. So this one has a default property. So what's the default value of the text that's inside of it? Right here, it's text input. So I could delete that right there. And this one has a cool property called hint text. So I could say something like, enter your name. Click out of that, and now it's saying like, hey, you should probably enter your name here, right? For doing a form or whatever, you can have a little bit of hint text to help them out. If I want to test out this control, I can go over here and click on play, and I can click inside of here and start typing something, right? So we can actually test out our little control here, and then I can click out. I can also change the different screen size and see what this would look like on a phone and all these other things too, which is pretty cool. All right, so now I want to show what really makes Canvas apps awesome. It's already probably seeming pretty cool, right? Your brain is probably thinking, oh my gosh, I can do so many different things. There's so much you can do with this. You can really get so creative with it, which is what makes it so fun. But let me show a cool thing that you can do with Canvas apps that really is at, I think, the heart of what makes it so awesome. And so this is how controls can reference each other. And this will give you an idea of how you can start to use Canvas apps, or really just how it works. I don't know, you might not ever need to do this, but this is just an example of how it works. So I can go to this text input control right here, and I'm going to drag it over here. What I can do with this label is I can go to its text property, and if I actually select this word right here, if I click on that, it brings up that property to customize right here. And instead of typing in text, so if I type in text, I need to use these double quotation marks. I think I just did a LinkedIn post on how some of the syntax works. So if you want to check that out, that actually can be very helpful if you're just getting started. When do you use single quotation marks or double or whatever, right? So that can be really helpful. But if I want to have this be something different, and have it be more custom, I can also do that. So instead of just typing in text, I could say, hey, let's display the text of this text input control. So the text input control, every control we add has a name. This one is called text input 1. I can change that. If I come over here, I click this little edit, and I can rename my control. But if I click on this label right here, highlight this, I can go text input 1. And now it highlights that in green and says, hey, you're pointing to this control right here. And it's giving me an error because it's like, what do you want to do with this? I don't know what you want to do with this control. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit a period. So the period, this was so confusing to me when I first started. I was like, what do you mean? What does a period do? So I think of a period as it's digging in to whatever you've typed before it. So it's digging into this control, and it's saying, hey, what is inside of this control? What are the properties that this control has? So the period says, hey, I want to look at the properties inside of this control that I've put here. And now you can see all these different properties for the control, which should look sort of familiar, right? So we have our text property, our width and all that stuff, right? I really care about just the text of the text input control. So I'm going to say text. And now it says, okay, I can work with that. So if I hit play, we come over here, I can say, I love Legos. You can see that the label is now displaying what I've just typed into it. So I wanted to show kind of how this works. And of course, you probably will never need to do this specific thing. But when you're doing forms or when we're saving data in different ways, to understand that you can reference other controls when you're doing formulas or whatever it is, you're calculating things. That's what's really awesome about Canvas apps. So I thought I'd show a super simple example of that. All right, let's now show how you can do a formula. So formulas are awesome. Think of formulas just like in Excel, right? You can sum data, you can do things with dates and add time to dates, lots of different things like that. In Canvas apps, some of the Excel formulas or some of the formulas in Canvas apps are actually just exactly the same as they are in Excel. So that will be really helpful if you're familiar with Excel. You're already going to know a lot of the different formulas that you can use inside of Canvas apps. And I can put a link in the on here that shows just a list of the formulas inside of Canvas apps. That can be so helpful when you're just starting out. Let's see. So he's asking, can you please explain lazy loading in Canvas apps? So I should be able to explain that at some point. I think we'll get a little bit further and then I can explain that. That's a good question. But let's go a little bit further and then we can probably talk about that on the second half of the training. Or if I'm not able to get to that, I can definitely get to that question. All right, so let's do a simple formula real quick, and then we'll really start getting into actually building our little task manager app here. So I am going to go to our label, and we're going to actually get rid of this now. So let's just show a very, very basic example of a formula. And to do a formula, you just type the name of it, usually capitalize, or you always capitalize the first letter. So we're going to say, let's just pull in today's date, just display that. So we could say today. And when I want to do a formula, just like Excel, I type the name and then I do open parentheses. And if there were anything that I needed to pass into that formula, like Excel, right? If you use sum, you're passing in the different cells that you want to sum up. So those are called parameters. So if you need to pass any parameters, any information into that formula, you can. But some formulas, like this really simple one, don't need anything to pass into it. So I can just end the formula and do a parentheses. And this is always going to do the same thing, right? So it's always just going to get today's date. And so that's a really basic formula right there. So today, showing what right here is very helpful. Actually, it shows here's today's date. The data type for this is a date. So that's really helpful. So let's take it up a notch really quick. I'm not going to go over like a bunch of different formulas, but we'll just show like two more. So let's do another one and we'll do a date add. So we'll say date add. So now we're adding a specific amount of days, years, whatever it is, to a date. The awesome part about Canvas apps is it's going to display what we need to do with this formula and kind of how it works. So it says, okay, you've typed in date add, you've started it with your parentheses. Now I need you to give me a date. So it says a reference date value. And we can go ahead and say, let's just give it today. So we'll say today. There we go. And now you can, there's a little comma right here, right? So we want to say, okay, now I want to do the number of units. That's the next parameter. So I'm going to hit comma. Now it says, okay, now you need to give me a number of units. So number of units to add, the number can be negative. This by default is going to add days. So if I type in 3, it's going to add 3 days. If I did -3, it would subtract 3 days from today. So let's just do like 3 days. And now if I hit comma, I could change this to be years or minutes or whatever I want, like years or weeks or whatever it is, right? So I could do that, but let's just end the formula right here. And now today's 4/16. Now it's saying 4/19. So that's pretty cool. So that I wanted to show kind of a really basic example of how formulas work. And now for the last thing that we'll do here, which is important, is let's try to bring in for our app. I'll delete this now since we don't need it. Let's actually build something for our app. Our app is not going to be the most beautiful app in the world, but let's start actually making it at least somewhat beautiful. So we're going to have a little message at the top when the user signs in, and it's just going to say hello and then their name. So first, let's get the user's name. So right now, I'm going to go to use the user formula. The user formula is very similar to today, so I don't need to pass anything into it. I can just say open parentheses, close parentheses. You can even see that it says returns a record containing user details. So that's kind of neat. So we'll go like this. And now, because we're in a label, the label needs to display something like text or a number or a date. The user formula is actually returning a record data type. So it's returning an item of data. It has the user's full name, it has the user's email, it's got their profile image, right? And so that's hard for the label to display. It's like, hey, I need you to pick one of these things. I can't display all of these at the same time because this is a record or an item, and that makes it hard for the label to do, right? So if I hit period right here, that will say, hey, give me the properties or what's inside of this record or this user formula that we just did that contains the information about the user. So if we hit period, it's going to pull in their email, their full name, the Entra object ID, and their image, like their profile image. So we just want their full name. So we'll say full name. And awesome. So the data type is text. The label can easily display text. That's what it's supposed to do. And so now we're saying our name right here. So now let's have it say hello. So how we would do that is come to the very beginning. When we're wanting to just add in straight text, we just use the double quotes. And we just say hello, add a space, add our double quotes. And then to combine these two things together, what we do is just do a space and add in that ampersand, and then add another space. And there we go. So it's saying hello, Ben Fetters. Let's make this a little bit bigger, change the font size a little bit, and maybe we change the color down here and we change this to blue or something like that. All right. Awesome. Hello, Ben Fetters. This would say hello, whatever your name is, right? If you're using this app, it'll say whatever the user that's using this app, it's going to pull in their name, right? So that's pretty awesome. All right. So there we go. Now let's officially go over a little bit of the data and the app that we'll be building. So I have a the most basic SharePoint list you've ever seen. Maybe you've seen a simpler one, but let's actually connect our app to the data, and now we can really get excited about all the cool stuff we'll be doing. But hopefully this is really helpful to kind of get started with how this works. Definitely play around with this after this training. I think it will be more helpful to do when you have more time, but you can start to see the different controls, the different properties they have, and how they work can be super helpful. Okay, so now let's go ahead and add data to our app. So what's so cool about Canvas apps is it can connect to so many, not only data sources, but it can connect to other things like Microsoft Teams or Outlook or even third-party tools, right? It can connect to like Adobe and things like that. There's just like Power Automate. Think of it like Power Automate if you use Power Automate at all. It just can connect to so many different services, which you'll see in just a moment. So if I come over here to this little data icon, I guess, I don't know what to call this box, I can add data to our app. So I'll come right here. And it's going to say, hey, here's some Microsoft Dataverse tables that you could add. if you're wanting to use Dataverse, you do have to have a better license than just a regular one, which I don't have for this account right now. But it's going to say, hey, here's the Dataverse tables you can connect to. Dataverse is the database of the Power Platform, essentially. So it's going to kind of default to showing you those. But if you want to connect to SharePoint, you can come down here to connectors. And here's where you can connect to so many things. These are just the basic ones that it shows. So I can do SharePoint. See this? Pretty cool. I can do Copilot Studio now. That's pretty awesome. I can do Outlook. So you can send an email from Canvas apps, right? So you can connect to Outlook and send an email, and it'll send an email from your account. So that's super awesome. I can connect to Planner, right? Create tasks from Planner. I have this task tracker, but I want it to also connect to Planner for whatever reason. That sounds a little crazy, but I can do that. And then if you really want to see all the connectors, I can click on See All, and here are 50 million different connectors. Probably not 50 million, but there's a lot. So I won't go through all of those. But if I go over here and just click SharePoint, good old SharePoint, go right here. Now what it's going to do is create a connection. So it's going to use my authentication, my credentials to create a connection to SharePoint, so that I can use my credentials to get data from SharePoint. So for whatever reason, I have two different connections to SharePoint. I don't know why. Maybe I accidentally clicked that sometime, but I have two of these. You can manage these connections back on the home screen. We won't do that today, but I can say, hey, I'm going to use this connection. If you're connecting to it for the first time, you just click add a connection, and you'll just sign in, and then that connection is created and you're good to go. I'll click on this, and now it's going to say, okay, what site would you like to connect to? If you don't see your site here, you can just type in the URL and click connect, and it should find that. So we're going to go to Power Apps Pro here, and here is a list of the lists that I have in SharePoint. Notice I can connect to document libraries as well. You can't upload documents super easily from Canvas apps. You have to use the way I do it is with Power Automate. So you can use Power Automate to upload documents. That's a whole other thing. But we'll be doing that in an advanced training that I'll be talking about later. But you can update their properties, view the documents, download them, things like that. Really awesome. So I thought I'd mention that you can work with document libraries as well. But we're going to connect to this task tracker list. If I wanted to, I could select more lists if I needed. I'll go ahead and click on connect. And now it says the data source task tracker was added to your app. So now I can display data from the task tracker list, and I can edit data from there. I can save data, create new items and things now. So that's super awesome. One thing that I'll do, I'll just show you the list really quick so you can be a little familiar with it. Super simple. But let's go here, and I can remove the data source if I want. Refresh the data if the data's changed and I want to bring in that new data into my app. I can manually refresh the data and click this, which is really helpful. And then I can also just click on edit data, and that will take me to our SharePoint site. I'll sign in again. Okay, all right. All right, so here's our little SharePoint site, or our SharePoint list, I should say. So it's just called Task Tracker. I have a few little items in here. I have a priority field. This is just a choice field. It's low, medium, or high. I have a completed field. This is a true or false field. And then I have a due date. That's a date picker, so a date field. And then I have a description field, which is a multi-lines of text field. So I thought I'd get a few different types of fields to show you when we create our form. Hey, this is how these fields work. This is how they're saved and things like that, right? Here's how you filter on these different fields. So that'll be really helpful. So I thought I'd show this really quick. If you want to follow along, you can write. If you want to follow along after when you're watching this recording, I think it'll be a lot easier to look at this. You can create these fields, even column, the same thing. and do the same thing that I've done here, and that could be kind of helpful for you. Let's go back to our app right here. And now let me make sure I'm covering everything that I'm wanting to. All right. Okay. So now let's go over adding a gallery to our app. So the gallery is a control that lets us display data. These are really cool. Let's go up here to our insert option and we'll scroll down here. Oh yeah, that's right. I always think they're in display. I don't know why, but I forever will think that they're in display. So I always open up that one. Oh my goodness. So they're in the layout option here, and there's lots of different types of galleries. We won't go over like all of them, but they work very similarly. They have it's basically a vertical gallery. So if you're scrolling top to bottom, and a horizontal gallery scrolling left to right, and then a flexible height gallery. So think of like social media, right? Some posts in social media are really small, some are bigger, and so the height of each item that you're displaying could be different, and so that's why it says flexible height. So those are pretty cool. They all work very similarly. So when we do this vertical gallery right here, it'll work very. All the same concepts apply to the other galleries. They're just a little different. So I'll click on vertical gallery. And let's drag this over like this. So right now it is displaying just some sample data, right? Just like PowerPoint or Word or Excel. Sometimes it just has sample data that can be added in, right? So that's what this is displaying right up here is this custom gallery sample. But the thing that we can do here is connect it to our SharePoint list. So galleries have some different fields that we haven't seen yet. I have a data source field. So this is saying what data am I looking at? I can click right here and just choose task tracker. Or this is a little misleading, but it says data source right here. This is the same property as the items property. So there, when you want to change the data source or the data you're viewing in your gallery, data source and items right here, same thing. So I don't know why that they're different, right? They're different right here and different right here. Anyways, but so we can go to items right here and actually type in task tracker. And now you can see it pulled in some of that data that was in my SharePoint list. So that's pretty awesome. If I click on an item in here, I'll go back to my tree view. And now we can see I've got my screen one, I've got my gallery that I've added, and here's all these controls inside of the gallery. So I can collapse the gallery. And then here's my label right there, right? So I can open this up, look at the different controls inside of here. And I'm actually going to delete all of these. So I'm going to hold down Control and just select all these, and we'll add these manually. So let's delete those. Awesome. All right. So if I click, I do need to mention this. If the weird thing about galleries, this is the weirdest part. If you want to add something into them, you want to make sure you click near the top. So when it says add an item from the insert pane, you can click right up here, and you can see I've like selected the top item. Even though I'm not seeing any data yet, I've selected that top row. That's important because then this is where I'm adding everything to. It's just this top row. And so if I wanted to add a field in here, I could go up here to insert and say text label. And now I've added in one of my fields right here. I can stretch this out. And notice whatever I do to this top item, it applies it to the rest of the gallery. So it's kind of like a pattern, right? Whatever you do in this first item, it's going to just duplicate that pattern and that same design and everything throughout the rest of the items that you're displaying. And we will show how to, hey, if this item is overdue, it's red and things, so we'll show that too. But this is the sort of the complicated part of calories. It's a little interesting, but it's not too bad. Um, but you just have to think of it as I'm designing this first item. Whatever I do to this item, it's going to do to the rest. So that includes all the little formulas and everything too, right? So if I click on this label and I look at the text property, you can see that it's saying this item dot title. And what this is doing here, so let's just break this down. When it says this item, it's really just meaning this item that it's currently on. So the first item, right? And that item is just that row inside of SharePoint. And so if I hit period, here's where I'm bringing in all the SharePoint has all these extra fields, right? So it's got like the ID and the link to the item and everything. Here's all the fields from that SharePoint item. I've got name, title, description. Here's some of these, right? So here's some of the fields that I've actually added, due date, things like that, right? Priority. So if I just go here and say title, that's pulling in the title field. And this same logic is applying to this item and this item. So this item means the first item when it's on the first row. But when it gets to when Power Apps is like trying to display this for you, right? When it gets to the second item, it says, "Okay, I'm displaying this item dot title." When it's on the second item, this item now means the second item in the list. Hopefully, that is making sense. It's a little weird once you play around with it. That should make a bit more sense. But as we keep building it, I think it'll make more sense. So I'm gonna pull this guy right here. Yeah, we'll make it a little bit longer. And let's add in a few more labels to display here. So we'll go like this. And this one, let's do the description. So this item dot description. Now it's pulling in all the different descriptions. These are my Lego sets that I want to build or possibly have built. I'm going to drag this description all the way across the bottom here. This is looking, yeah, so we're going to design this a little bit better. But something that I like to do sometimes is, we can italicize this or something like that, right? Make that a little bit different. Now let's grab this guy, copy. All I'm doing here is just doing Control C, Control V, just copying and pasting it. So I can also copy and paste it just like that too. All right, so let's go this item and we'll do the due date. And let's put that one way over here. And then Control C, Control V. Let's do the priority. So priority. Now this one's a little bit different. Because it's a choice field, it's technically trying to display a record. You can actually see that right here. And this is so important. I say this in all my trainings. You have to look at this data type right here. If you're ever wondering what's going on, why something isn't working, so many times, especially when you're starting out, it's because you're not paying attention to the data type. And so just knowing, okay, there's a red line. The red line is bad. And it's saying the data type is a record, and the label can't display that, right? It's saying there's multiple fields, or there's multiple properties inside of this. I don't know how to display this right. And so with a choice field inside of SharePoint, how it works is it's a record, but it's a singular, it has one field in it, and it's called value. It's kind of confusing here. So let's add in here the next piece, and then I think it'll make more sense. So I'll do period and say value. So what it was doing, I like to explain this because I know that can be so confusing, right? So let's do this. Let's go over this a little bit. If I do 2 forward slashes, that does a little bit of code comments. So now I can type whatever I want, and it doesn't actually affect anything over here. So I can add notes or whatever I like, so that can be helpful. So what it's doing when I just do priority, and this comes up so many times, so that's why I'm going to cover it right now. When I'm just doing this item dot priority, Power Apps sees this as a record. So when I do a record, I do curly brackets, value, and then whatever the priority is, low or medium or high or whatever that is, right? So it sees it as a record, and a record in Power Apps has these brackets, and it has the field value, and then or the field name, sorry. So it has the field name, which is called value, kind of confusing, and then it has the actual value of that option, which is called low. So that's what's happening right now. And the label is saying, hey, I can't display this. I'm seeing that there's a field called value, and that's kind of all I'm seeing. And this is a record, and I can't display that. So as soon as I say, hey, let's look inside of this priority field and let's see what's in there. If I hit period, it says, oh, there's a value field, and that's all there is. So it's just seeing this value right here. If I click on that, now Power Apps sees this as it takes away the curly brackets and it takes away that field, and it just sees this as the text now. So we've dug in a little bit deeper, right? So now we're not just looking at that whole item, we're looking at the actual value inside of that field of that item. So that's a little confusing. We're going to do this, we're going to do that same concept a little bit more. So I think that will start to make more sense, and it can be kind of confusing. All right. Awesome. Let's see now what field. Oh yeah, completed. That's right. Okay, so let's show our completed, and let's do a checkbox. There is a checkbox right there. All right. Maybe we want to do it. We can do different things with this here, but we'll change the text to be completed. Notice how this one's a little bit different. This default property, if I come right here and click on default, it's going to be either true or false. And so that means it's a Boolean data type. So whatever I put here, it's going to need to end up being true or false, right? So what I want to do is say this item and do a period and look at all our different fields in our SharePoint list. And I want to choose the completed option. So completed is a true or false field, right? So it's either going to be true or false, which is what we want. So I'll say completed. And now you can see one of these is completed and the other two are not, which if I go over to SharePoint, this middle one here is completed. It's got the check mark, and the other two don't. So that's perfect. All right, so the last thing I want to show here is, before we do some formatting on this and filtering, is if I select, so I can select the different labels inside of here, but then I can also click just in this little outside space. So if I try to not select anything in this first item and just kind of select the first item itself, so kind of like right there, it's really interesting. It's kind of strange, but you get used to it. So if you click right there, that's going to select our first item. And now what I can do is change the size of this. So if I want to stretch these out more or shrink them in, I can shrink them a little too much, right? I can do that. I can also, something that can be helpful is I can go to insert here and add a little rectangle and just stretch this all across. Bring this down right here. Oh, it's a little too far. So we'll say the height of our rectangle is 1 pixel. And now we've got a little line separating our items, right? So we can do a little bit of formatting here, right? So that can be really helpful. Let's see. Now what we can do is, just want to make sure I've got everything. Yeah, okay. All right. I've covered everything that I've wanted to so far. So now let's go into the conditional formatting stuff. So here's what we can do. Let's do for the title, let's actually make this bold, at least semi-bold, right? So it looks a little bit better. Looks more like a title. And for these fields, there's lots of different ways to do this, but let's color these different based off of the actual value. So if it's low, maybe it's gray. If it's medium, it's green. If it's high, it's red or something like that, right? And for the due date, we can make this red if the due date is past due, right? So we can do that. And then for the whole item, we could say, hey, if this item is completed, let's make this whole item be green. So we can also do that. So let's start with our due date here. A lot of these are let's actually do the simplest one is actually completed. So let's actually start with that one. So to change the whole color of our just our item, I actually go to show how this works. So we have the color of the gallery. Even if I've selected this top item right here, I'm still selecting the gallery. So when I come over here to the properties, I'm still just changing the properties of the whole gallery. So if I want to change the background color of the whole gallery, I could do that. I could say the whole gallery is this gray blue color or gray or whatever it is. We'll change it back to white. But if I want to change the color of that item, I can come over here to the properties. And what I do here is I change the template fill. So this first item is the template. It's what's being used to then, the same logic in that first template is being used across all the rest of the items in the gallery. So if I want to make that different, or have these be different than each other, potentially, then I can go to template fill. Right now it's just white. So what I can do here is now I need to give it a color. And that's one of the things, that's another thing that's so helpful to know with Canvas apps is what does it want and what are you giving it? So that is one of the things that took me so long to understand. But when you are working with Canvas apps and you're starting to, it's not doing what you want it to do, right? And you're starting to have little issues, which happens no matter what skill level you're at. The first thing you can think about is, okay, what does Power Apps want and what am I giving it? So what I mean by that is this template fill property, it wants a color. And if you give it something else, it's not gonna like it, right? Just like with the label, when we give it a record, it doesn't like that. It wants text or a number or a date to display. So with this template fill, it wants a color. The cool thing is Power Apps doesn't really care how you eventually get to that color as long as you give it a color in the end. So you can have formulas that are, maybe you're looking up another SharePoint list and you're pulling in the certain colors or whatever, right? That's an interesting example. But sometimes it gets complicated, right? But as long as, no matter how complicated it is, as long as it ends up giving, that formula ends up giving a color at the end, then you're good. So as long as you're giving Power Apps what it wants at the end, it's happy. So let's go to template fill. And we're going to say, we could say color dot, and here's where we're pulling in all the different colors. So I can say color, period, and here's just all the different little predetermined Power Apps colors right here. So that's one way to give it a color, right? But let's say we want it to be green if it is completed. So we can use our if formula, say, hey, if, and here's where, because we're changing the template, we can say, hey, if this item in our template dot completed, so if this value, which is true or false, equals true, then we want it to be color dot forest green. I'm pretty sure that's pretty dark. We'll see how this goes. And if it's not completed, we'll say color dot white. So how this, oh, there it goes. That's really green. Wow, that's pretty bad. But so how this if formula is working is I first give it the condition. I say, hey, Power Apps is wanting whatever I put right here. It just needs to be true or false, right? This equals true is either going to be true or false. If this is true, then Power Apps will say, hey, okay, if this is true, then it's going to be green. And if it's false, then it's going to be white. So that's how the if statement works. You give it the condition, similar to Excel, right? here's the condition. If that condition is true, this is what's going to happen. If that condition is false, this is going to happen. So that is a really dark color of green. I can actually do let's do a color fade formula. We're getting a little fancy here. And so I'm going to color fade on this forest green, and I'll hit comma. I think I do like 0.9. Oh, look, that looks better. So now I've just brought, if you do 1, it's completely faded. If you do 0.1, it's just a little faded, and 0.9 is really faded. So, all right, so that's kind of how that formula works. There's a little extra formula there for you. All right, so that's awesome. Now, the last thing we can actually do with this example is, because this value itself is either true or false, we actually don't need equals true here, because this is just going to be, this is a true or false field. So this field is already true or false. So we can just take out equals true. Say, hey, if this item is completed, it's true. Awesome. It's going to be this faded green color. If not, it's going to be white. It's pretty cool. All right. So that looks pretty good. I like that. So now let's do the due date one. So we'll go to our due date here, and I'll come over to our color here. So I can click this and change it to red or something, right? Or I can come over here to color, click on that, and that's going to change the text color. So it doesn't say font color, it just says color. And so it's the text color. All right, let's do our if statement here. Now let's think about this. So if this item dot due date, if this due date is less than today, should be red. So let's do that. So we'll say less than, just a little less than symbol, and then our formula that we've already used, today. All right, so if that's true, if this item dot due date is less than today, then we want it to be color dot dark red. And if not, we'll say color dot black. And then we'll end our if statement. So these two are red because today's the 16th. So these are both behind the due date. But the interesting thing is, this field right here is red when this item is completed, right? So we don't really want it to be red if the item's completed, because it wasn't really overdue, right? We don't really know that. So what we can do here is add another condition to our logic. And there's two ways to do this. So I could say double and. This is different when you're combining text, right? When we did our this guy right here, we just use one ampersand. And I explained this in the LinkedIn post. It really is very helpful if you're just starting out with all these how the different syntax works. So if you use one ampersand, if you're just combining like text and a formula inside of a label, but if you're trying to say and in like a condition, then you use two ands. So we'll go back here. Oh, did I delete them? Okay. I was like, where did they go? Okay, so we'll do two ands, and we'll say, hey, this item has to also not be completed for this to be red. So we'll say, and this item dot completed equals false. We'll just do false in lowercase. All right, so now let me make this semi-bold so you can. Okay, now you can see it a little better. So now this one's black, even though the date is in the past, so it's before, it's less than today, right? Because this one is completed, that still returned, this entire thing returned false and said, okay, it's this is true, but because we're using and, this was not true. So this whole thing right here is false, and now it's black. So those logical things, right? You're going to have to do that a lot with Canvas apps. And sometimes you just got to kind of think it through. And again, if you're wanting to come back to this recording, it can be helpful if you're trying to do your own conditional formatting and things like that, to try this out yourself, think it through a little bit, see how that's working and everything. That can be really helpful. So I know this can get a little complicated. So let's actually, I just want to show the other way to do this really quick. So if I get rid of, well, let me not get rid of those just yet. The other way I can do this is use the and formula. Say and instead of these ampersands here, I'll just put a comma. I have one parameter right here for our and the second one right here, and just do a parentheses, and that's the same thing. So awesome. So that is how that's working. If we were really fancy, we can change this a little bit more. I don't think I'll do that just yet. I think we'll keep it simpler for now. We could simplify this a little bit more, right? But let's keep going to our the last one here. So let's do our priority. All right, and let me just make sure we're still good on time. Okay, yeah, we should still be good on time. All right, so now let's make these be 3 different colors. And we could use a couple if statements to say, hey, if it's medium, be green. If it's low, be gray. If it's medium, or if it's high, be red. And we could do, a couple different if statements, right? But we can also do something that's a little easier and use what's called a switch function. So switch statement, I think you can call it that too, but switch formula. There we go. Switch right there. So we're going to use switch. Switch is really interesting. So how it works is you give it one value and you compare that one value to multiple things. And it's basically going to say, hey, let's look at the priority, and that's what we're going to be comparing everything to. If the priority is low, the color is gray. If the priority is medium, the color is green. If the priority is high, it's red, right? So it's an easier way of doing this type of scenario without doing a bunch of different if statements. So what we're going to do is say, hey, the value I want you to compare to or be looking at to determine what color this is going to be is the priority value. You do want to make sure you've got this, right? So this is text. If I highlight this, another really awesome thing, if you're not sure what something is, what data type it is, most of the time you can highlight that piece and then it'll say text, and so you can say, oh, okay, that's text. If I get rid of this, highlight that, right? Well, it's telling me anyways, it says this is a record, right? So that can be really helpful. It's really simple, but it's very helpful, especially when things aren't working. So let's hit period and do value. So we're going to say, hey, let's compare the text of this. And now we'll do comma. And we'll say, hey, this is really helpful too right here. So we have switch value and match value, match result. So switch value is our priority field. And the match value is, hey, if it is low, and then the match result is it's gray. So we'll say if the priority is low, we'll do comma. Now we're doing our match result, which is highlighted right there. We'll do color dot, see light. We'll just do gray. Color dot gray. Now I hit a comma again, and now I can say, hey, I could give it a default value of, hey, if it's not low, then just be black or something, right? So I could do that, but I could also say, okay, now if it's medium, and hit comma. Now you can see that it's this formula right here. It was saying default value, and now it's like, oh, okay, you're trying to add another one of these. You're trying to add another like switch value combination thing, right? So now if it's medium, let's say color dot light green. Some of these colors are interesting, but then if it's high, I can spell. If it's high, then we want it to be color dot dark red. And I just realized I am on the wrong property here. I am on the text property, which is not the color. So that's why it's giving us an error here. I'm glad I noticed that before then. You guys probably noticed that before me, maybe. But let's go ahead and copy this and delete that and just say this item dot priority dot value. There we go. Okay. All right, that was probably really confusing. Okay, so now let's go to the color. That's what we want to be on. So I'll click on color again. And now let's paste that in here. Okay, awesome. There we go. So now this is how the switch is working. If I want to add more, I can still add more, right? If I want to add, hey, if it's not low or medium or high, it's purple or whatever it is, right? So all I would do to do that is say, hey, color dot black, whatever. If it's none of those, then be black. So that's what you can do there. All right, even though that green is pretty bad, let's at least keep it like that so you can see how this is working. All right. Let's see. Oh, okay. I'm glad I'm not alone, Carter. That's awesome. Okay. Oh man, I still do things like that all the time. So you're not alone. That's great. All right. So let's go ahead. Let's see. I want to make sure I'm covering everything. Let's go ahead and add in some basic filters. So filtering can get a little complicated, but let's just start with the basics here. So to do a filter, one thing that we would want to filter on, and I might not show everything, right? There's so many different type of filters, but I want to show the main concepts here. Is I can go over here to insert, and I can do I want to have, let's say we want to do a filter on the priority, right? So we want to look at our task by the priority. So we're going to use what's called a drop down. All right. Just like our gallery, it's pre-populated with some values already. And by the way, if you hold down the Alt key, so I'm going to hold down Alt, it makes your app go into play mode without having to click the play button. So if I want to just test something real quick, I can hold down the Alt key and click on this, and it's kind of like I'm in the play mode of the app. And as soon as I let it go, it goes out of that. So I just have a few different options in here by default. So let's bring in the values of the priority field, the options, sorry, into this dropdown. So if I'm selecting this dropdown, I go over to items here. I can click on the items property, come over here. And what I can do, there's a few different ways to do this. What I could do is when you're doing a table, you can actually do straight brackets. And I can do quotes and say low, comma, medium, and high. So I could do that. And if I hold down the Alt key, I can see low, medium, and high. So that's one way of doing it. The one thing I do want to mention here, if I highlight this, if I click on this drop down, it still technically creates a single column table and with a field called value. So that's really important to understand. So even though I don't specify the actual field name, I just give it values. Power Apps defaults that to the field being value, if that makes sense. So it says, hey, you've got a little table. You've only got one field, and that field name is value. And here's the three items in there. So that's kind of how that works. So the other way of doing it really quick is, before we do it the real way, is I can use the table formula. And for this one, I'm going to give it a record or records. And so I've got the curly brackets here. And now I could say like name and then low. And my curly brackets, add another one, name, medium, right? And so this is kind of the syntax of how I create an actual record or an item. And then I end my table whenever I'm ready. I could add, the last item here. And now if I hold down the Alt key, click on this, got low and medium. I could add high, right? But now let's actually highlight this whole thing. If we click this drop down, now instead of the value of that being, or the field, right, being value, we've actually given it a name, and it's called name. So if I highlight this, now instead of value, that's now name, because I've actually specified what the field name is. So I thought that would be really important to help understand. Power Apps will default to value if you don't specify. So now let's do the final option, which is the best option here. And that is to actually pull in the options, the choice options from SharePoint. So to do that, I use a special formula called choices. And all it wants is just the field from my data source. So it wants the task tracker field, or sorry, it wants the task tracker list. And then it says, okay, what choice field do you want from that list? I want the priority. Can I spell? Okay. All right. So now I close the choices. Notice I don't do period value, right? I just say, hey, this is the field. And if I click right here, or even highlight it, it'll pull in, say, here's value, here's all the different options for our choice field right here. So there we go. All right. So now the awesome part about that is if I add choice options in SharePoint, and I add another option like very low or urgent or something, right? I don't need to go in and change my app. So now it's just pulling straight from SharePoint. If I change it to SharePoint, it'll automatically change in my app, which is really cool. So if I hold down the Alt key, again, same thing. Now we're just connected to SharePoint. So that's pretty awesome. Let's actually rename this to, before we filter on things. When I rename things, I don't rename every single control. That could be crazy. But if I'm ever going to reference this control, which we'll need to do, because I'm going to be filtering off of this dropdown, that's usually when I rename controls. So the really important controls I will rename if I ever need to know what that control is. And then if your app is just starting to feel like, oh gosh, I got so many controls here, you can start to rename some of them and some of the important ones, or all. I mean, you could rename all of them too. But when you're renaming controls, typically what people do is with a drop down, they just start with DD for drop down. And then we'll say drop down like priority, like that. That's usually what we do. You could add the word filter on the end or something like that. That's usually what we do. So now let's come over here and we will go to our data source property, and we're going to filter on this task tracker list. So to filter on this, we're going to use the filter formula. So I'm going to say filter. And the filter formula works by, I first give it a data source, and then I give it some conditions and say, hey, only these items that meet this condition can be passed into Power Apps. So task tracker is the list I want to filter on, right? Do comma, and I'll say I want to filter on the priority field, but this is helpful. I do want to just point to the value, right? So here's where that comes in again. So I want to say dot value. So now I want to filter on the actual text of that field instead of like the record. So I'll do dot value, and I could say equals low and text, right? And close this filter. And then it goes and gets just that one item that equals low. And just to show this again really quick, if I did want to just filter on the priority and not do the dot value, I just want to show, to really drive this into your brain. I think it can actually be super helpful. I would have to say, hey, I need to turn this into a record and say value low. And even then, I don't think it's even going to work, to be honest. What does it say? Incompatible types. Well, I don't know why it's saying those are not compatible, but that's interesting. Well, that's why you never filter it on that. So then you say dot value, and you go like this. Well, if you're doing SharePoint, I think it has it works a little bit differently actually. So, anyways, that's how that works. That's right. That's why you do dot value. But now we want to point to our dropdown. So we say whatever's selected in the dropdown. So we'll say, hey, DD priority dot selected dot value. So if I just did dot selected, that's the record, right? So we don't want that. We want the actual text value, say dot value. And now we're bringing that one in. So let's hit play. Say I want to look at the medium one. I want to look at the high one. And then what we can also do here is we can do, let me slow down real quick. So if you go to advanced, advanced just shows you all of the properties for that control, even the ones that are hidden right here. So this, if you're in display, it doesn't show you quite everything. If you go to advanced, it shows you all of the properties. And same thing right here. Here's all the properties. So sometimes I come here, sometimes I go over to advanced, and then you can search for one right here as well. So I want to do a property called allow empty selection. And I'm going to select inside of here, and I'm going to set this to true. So now that that's true, I'll come over here and click play. If I select high again, now I can have an empty, this drop down can be empty now. So that can be nice. I'll cover how to do like an all option to have, just because we don't have quite enough time today. I want to show some other things, but in the advanced training I'll be mentioning later on, we'll show how to do, here's how you do all, so that if you don't want to filter on it just yet, you just want to show all of the priorities, you can do that, and as well as some other different filtering and things. But the same concept applies with our other filters, right? Go to medium here. If you're doing a date, you use the date picker control. You can use a checkbox filtering off of those, right? It's all very, very similar. But I want to show some other things before we run out of time. Make sure I'm showing all the things that we want to show today. So let me take a look at this here. All right. So let's talk. I do want to mention something here called delegation, and this is a really helpful thing to understand. I will also, I think I need to send an email out, put things in the description, and say here's all the little links to some of my LinkedIn posts and things like that. That can be really helpful, as well as some Microsoft links as well. But I want to mention delegation, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But and then we'll take a quick little break, and then we'll finish up the rest and do some forms and do some other stuff too. So with delegation, this is so important. This is like the boring thing that you just need to understand. So I won't take too much time explaining it. If you have any questions about it, you can let me know. And I have a whole little LinkedIn post that explains it more, and I'll send some other info about it. But the main idea behind it is sometimes there are things that Power Apps, when you're working with certain data sources, there are certain filters and things that you just can't do very well with that data source. So, for example, I think of it like I have this whole library example. So think of a library as, let's just say, SharePoint. I could go to the library and I could say, hey, give me all the Harry Potter books where that have a flying car in them, right? Or something like that, right? Give me all the Harry Potter books that have dragons in them or something, right? And so SharePoint will say, yeah, sure, I can go and do that. But sometimes there's really, really complicated filters where SharePoint will say, and how it works with Power Apps, right? It'll say, hey, actually, that's too complicated. I can't do that. So instead of going and grabbing all those specific books that you wanted, I'm just going to let you go look through the first like 500 books and find them yourself. And so that's this idea of Power Apps is going to the library of SharePoint and saying, hey, I need to get all of the items where the priority is equal to low. And SharePoint can say, hey, sure thing, I can totally do that. But there are certain filters, and I'll give links on how this how this all kind of works and what things you can do and can't do. Um, Power Apps usually tells you what you can do and can't do as well. But right, it's if Power Apps goes to SharePoint, the SharePoint library in this example, right, and says, "Hey, give me all the Harry Potter books where Harry's wearing a red shirt or something like that." It'll say, "Ah, that's too complicated. I can't do that for you. But here's the first 500 items in the SharePoint list, for example." And then Power Apps will then do the work of searching through those first 500 items. That's the thing. If have to start thinking about if there's more items, if there's more than 500 items and things like that, right? Um, then you might not get all the items that you need and everything. So I do go into that a bit more, um, and reach out if you have any questions about that. So I wanted to at least bring that up. There's probably some other videos out there that explain that better. And in our training, we'll go over that a lot more and how to deal with it. Let's talk a bit about collections, though. Collections, and then we'll end here. So we'll talk about collections for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then I think we'll end there. So collections allow us to temporarily store data. Think of them as they're kind of like a variable, but you store a table. It's like a table variable. So you're storing a collection of data inside of your app. You could use a collection, for example, if you're having a menu on the side, those menu options, that could be a collection. So you could store it's essentially static data. It's not anywhere in SharePoint. It's not in a data source. It just lives inside of the app, and it's created when the user is doing certain things or when they load the app and things like that, right? So these collections work really well a lot of the times when you're doing delegation. And I won't be able to show this specific example here, but the idea is you can use and we'll build a collection. But you can use a collection to say, Power Apps can go to the library, right, SharePoint, whatever, in our example here, and say, "Hey, give me all the Harry Potter books where, like, where Harry is flying in a car or something like that," right? And it'll say, "Oh, okay, here's these 3 books or 2 books or whatever it is." And then you bring back those books, those items into your collection, and then you do your complex filtering after that. So, for example, let's create a collection, and then we'll kind of show how that really works with delegation and things like that. But you can use them for all sorts of reasons, right? So you'll use collections all the time. So I know I definitely need to cover them. Let's actually just add a blank screen here. All right, so we're going to go up to Insert. I realize I should probably be drinking water here. I think my voice is going to go out soon. All right, so let's go ahead and we'll add in a button right here. And then we'll also add in another gallery. So this time we're going to just do a blank gallery. So if we choose one of these, it actually has like that the pre data right there, or there's like a sample data. So if you do blank vertical gallery, that's just a blank gallery. So let's do that. All right, so let's create our collection. So it's really pretty easy. So when we create a collection, there's a few different functions that are related to collections, but the basic one is just called collect. And the first thing we do with our collect formula to create a collection is we name our collection. Say, what is this called? So we usually start with COL for collection. And we could say first collection. And then I'll hit a comma. And here's where we say, okay, what do you want inside of your collection? Here's where, I can pass in data from a data source, or I can create my own little table of data too. So I can come over here and say collect, and I can say I want an item in here called, let's say name, bin, favorite, whoa, not spelled today. Favorite color is green. And then let's add in one more person. We'll do name is Hunter. And I don't know Hunter's favorite color, but I'm going to guess it's blue. And then we close our parentheses. And now we're creating a collection, so like a table of data. And we're adding 2 items into it. So one item, and they both have a name field and a favorite color. And there's Ben and green. We've got this item here. So Ben, Hunter, favorite color. Okay, Hunter says blue is his favorite color. Okay, that's great. I love that. That's awesome. I knew it. All right, so now that we've got this collection, it's actually not created yet until the user does something to create it. So if I hit play here and I click this button, boop, now, like my sound effect. It'd be cool to be able to add sound effects here, but all right. So now if I go to my gallery and we go to the data source, so the items property right here, we're going to now say collection first collection. And now if I click inside of my item, bring this up here and insert a couple of labels, we'll see I'm starting to get that data from my collection. So here's Ben and Hunter, green and blue. Awesome. So that's how collections work. Again, remember you can create data, pull in data from, and we'll show this in just a second. You pull in data from a SharePoint list, and we'll show why that can be really helpful. I think of it as, sometimes I think of it as like views. Like if I wanted to just view data that was, hey, I just want to look at all of the tasks that were created by me. I could do that, and I could store all those in a collection, and there might only be like 30 of those or something, right? And so if I bring all 30 of those into a collection and I want to look at those, now I can filter those however I need to filter those and not worry about things that are too complicated, right? I've already got the 30 items. Now I can just filter those however I need to, and that can be really helpful. So we'll kind of show how that works. So now I do want to show this. So if I hit play, if I hit collect, it's going to collect those 2 items again into that same collection. So I click this button, adds those same 2 items. If I click this button again, 2 items again, right? So that's how the collect button works if you want to add more items. I do this actually with like comments a lot of the time. So if I want to add a comment section to a form, I can store all of those comments inside of a collection. And every time they click this button to add their comment, it'll add in details about who they are and what their comment is and when they entered the comment and things like that, right? So you can use collections for lots of different things, and that can be really helpful. Lots of times you just want to actually clear out your collection, just delete it. So let's copy this button here. And instead of doing this, we're now just going to say use our clear formula. And the clear just deletes everything in the collection. So we're going to say clear first collection. Close that. We'll change the button to clear so we can get clear here. We'll do collect, clear. All right, so let's hit play. So now if I click this button, clears everything out. If I click this collect button, it adds those items in. And finally, the last thing that I will do is I'll copy this button here, is I will show, well, let's do it up top. There's also the last formula we can do here is called clear collect, and it does those 2 formulas combined. And it's going to do, it's going to clear out the data and then add the data back in. My camera is having issues here. So let me actually just try to turn it off and back on. And if it's not working, I'll fix it before we come back. But come on, little fella. My camera decided to die. Okay, I'll try to fix that before we come back. So that's interesting. But okay, yeah, we'll keep going on. Let's see if I can get that fixed. All right, so clear collect is going to clear out the data and then add it again. So sometimes you want to like go and see the new updates or of the data you're trying to collect, right? If you're trying to get all those tasks that were created by you and you want to refresh that data in a way, you can use clear collect to do that. So we can hit play, hit collect, and it cleared everything out and then added those 2 items in. So I can go like this, clear it out, click this, add those items, add some more items, clear collect, right? So that's kind of how that's working. That can be really helpful. Let's exit out of here. And the last thing that I'll show before we'll end here in the last little 5 minutes, or we'll take a break. Sorry, not ending. So before we take a break, let me just show how this works with pulling in data from a SharePoint list. So what I could do is say, okay, now instead of let's call this brand new form or brand new collection. So collection my tasks, for example. And what we're going to do is we're going to filter our task tracker list and say the created by. So there's a created by field in SharePoint, right? Whoever created that item, all these are me. And that created by field, if I hit period, it has lots of different things in it. So the created by itself is like a record, and it has claims, department, display name, all these different little fields inside of it. We'll just do the display name to keep it easy. And we'll say equals Ben Fetters. If we wanted to, you could use the user formula as well, right? And now we'll close that and go like that. I'll hit play. I'll click this button. Took a little bit longer that time because it's actually going to go get data from SharePoint. We'll delete these 2 for now. And now instead of this, we'll say we want the collection my tasks. And now it's going to look very similar to our other gallery that we had, right? The data it's basically a copy of that data. But now we can do things that we weren't able to do before. So now if I go here and add in a text input control, come right here. We can now search through this data. That's one of the things that we can't do regularly. If I come over here, we're pointing directly to SharePoint here. We're not looking at a collection. I actually can't search through data and if I have over 500 items in SharePoint. So I can't just search through the text of the description or the title or things like that, right? If I have over 500 items. And so that's one of the reasons why if I want to be able to do that, I can first grab some of the data, like maybe I just want to search through my tasks, and I can store those in a collection. Let's just add our title here. So we'll do title and description. And this text input we'll call it TI text input search. And we'll come right here, and now we'll say, hey, I'm gonna actually search through this data. Say search, and we'll do comma. And it first wants the text. What text am I going to use to search? I want TI search. Or what do we call it? It actually didn't rename it. It sometimes doesn't rename it. I click away or whatever. So that's funny. Okay, so it's it's called text input 2. That happens to me all the time as well. Text input 2.text. All right, that's the data I'm using to search, and the column I want to search through is the description column. All right, so now if I hit play, I can say pirate ship, and there that item comes up. Or I can say Lego, and that takes away one of those items, right? So that's how that's working. If I tried to do that same thing over here, I add in, and then we'll take a break right after this. And again, if any of this isn't making sense, just reach out in an email and I can send any more resources and things like that too. All right, come down here to the gallery. Let's add that same search thing here. So we'll say search. Let's get rid of this for now to keep it simple. Task tracker. and text input 3 this time, dot text. So the text that's been typed into that text input control. And we'll do description like this. Notice it has this little yellow squiggly. I like calling it, I usually call it squiggly here. If I highlight that, it'll say delegation warning. The search part of this formula might not work correctly on large data sets. So what this is doing is this is one of those times when Power Apps goes to the librarian, the SharePoint librarian, and says, hey, I want to search through the text. And it's going to be this text control right here. And I want to search through the description field. The SharePoint librarian is saying, hey, sorry, I can't do that for you. I'm going to give you the first 500 items, and you, Power Apps, are going to search through those 500 items yourself. So not only if you have this squiggly line here, this yellow one, it slows things down because now Power Apps is getting probably more data than it needs, and it's searching through that itself. We don't have to worry about it right now because we only have 3 items, right? But if you have a list that's over 500, then you do want to consider this and think about this. So that's why I really wanted to bring this up. It's so important. And if I go to the one thing I will also mention before we end here is if I go to settings, or before we take a break, I keep saying that, and go to actually general right here. Here's the data row limit. So when I say 500 items, right, if there's a delegation issue, if you're doing the search thing, right, and it's saying, hey, I can't search through that, here's the first 500 items, you can increase that to 2,000 right here. And so that way you really have up until 2,000 items. If your list grows larger than 2,000 items, then you want to really start considering this. And even before, you want to consider this. Say, why is it not? Or what do we need to do to deal with this? Because I know this list, there's going to be definitely over 2,000 tasks eventually, so we need to consider how we're going to deal with that. I cover more of those details in some of the other trainings, but on how to deal with that in a good way, I do have some posts and some PDF guides on how to do that as well that can be helpful still. But if we go right here, this is kind of one of those ways I can first get a collection of just all my tasks that I know is only, maybe I know I'm only going to ever have 30 tasks, and then I can search through those, and then I don't have any delegation issues. And this works just fine. So let me know if you have any questions on that. Delegation that's a whole topic of itself as well. Well, like I mentioned, we do cover that a lot more in our advanced training that I'll share a little bit more at the end here. But let's go ahead and take a small break. We will start up again in 20 minutes. So right now it's 10:37 for me. So we'll start in like 23 minutes. So right at 11 a.m. Mountain Daylight Time. So come back in 20 minutes. And we'll continue on. We're going to create a form, show how to save data with the form, how to view data inside of a form, sharing and publishing our app. And then we're also going to cover the patch function, which is really awesome, as well as variables. So there's still a lot more to cover here. It's going to be awesome. So I'll go ahead and put this little guy up right here, and we'll be back in 20 minutes. All right. So my camera is deciding that it doesn't want to work. So you will just have to imagine my beautiful face. Yeah, I don't know why it doesn't want to work right now, but I've tried. And yeah, so we'll just keep going. So I do want to go over the question about lazy loading. So we don't have to go super deep into this, but I do want to mention, and then we'll continue on in the course. But there's a question about explaining lazy loading in Canvas apps. So how Canvas apps works is lots of the times the app will actually not load everything inside the whole app until it needs to. So I think you can actually configure this in the settings. Let's go over this delay. I think it's delay. Yeah. Anyway, so there's a few different well, that's retired anyways, but so there's a few different settings and things in here and that can help with loading and things like that. But how when the app starts, if you click on the app right here, here's some just of the properties of the app that you can configure. And one of the main ones is called on start. And this one, any formulas you put in here, you're creating collections, you're setting variables, which we'll cover here in a little bit. Anything that you're doing when the app loads, that's gonna happen right here. So that's this on start. But for example, with like galleries or screens that you're not on yet, Power Apps won't always just load the whole entire app and get all of the data right away. It'll kind of wait until you get to that screen or until you're seeing that gallery with that data, and then it'll go get that data, right? So that's kind of why it's lazy. It's not getting everything right away, and that helps a little bit with the speed. The other thing that I'll mention, so will cover this in the advanced app training, but otherwise this training would be so long. But there is something called formulas, and these are really great. I have mentioned these before, but these how these work is you're essentially creating variables and even actual formulas in the app that won't run until the app actually needs them to run. So, for example, if you have a formula that's saying, hey, go get the data about the tasks or whatever it is trying to do. If that formula isn't only being used on screen two, and the user comes into the app and they stay on screen one the whole time and they never get to screen two, that formula will never the app will never run that formula. It'll never execute that. So that's a really helpful thing that we start to learn is, and that really can speed things up a lot as you start to optimize things to make Power Apps or to make your app only do what it needs to do and to not do more than that. A big thing with performance is right is getting it to only deal with the data that it needs to. A lot of mistakes that I see when I'm doing one-on-one sessions or in my other trainings is people are having the app get too much data and it doesn't even need all that data. Um, you don't need to see all that data, or you don't need to have the app deal with that much data, and all these different things, right? Or it's you are not dealing with variables in a good way. Um, you're having the app. So we'll mention this here in just a little bit. But if you are on this screen and you reference a control on another screen, then that actually slows down the app because then it has to keep screen one and screen two in memory. So that's an example. So there's lots of things that can slow the app down, and there's lots of things that can speed it up. And I've covered a lot of those different things. Um, that's one of the big differences I see with beginners when they're starting to build. Sometimes it's really fun. You just want your app to do everything right, and then all of a sudden it looks really awesome maybe, but it's super slow, right? And that's never fun. So a lot of times we see those clunky apps or really slow apps when you're first starting to build. Totally normal. I did that all the time, right? And then now, as you learn how apps work, how the loading works and everything, you can start to make it really fast and still do everything that you need it to do. So we'll cover some of that today, and then we'll cover that more in other trainings and other things later on. But for the rest of this training, we are going to go ahead and go over creating a form. So I guess I'll leave this screen up right here. We can leave it. That's a nice little screen. And by the way, if I right click on this, I can hit rename. We can say this is the home screen. I've renamed my screen, so it's a little bit better. Let's go ahead and add a form, and we'll start configuring our form. So we're going to go over to new screen, And we could, I think there's like a header and a form. We could do that one. That can be a little weird because there's all this stuff being added. But you guys can totally play around with these. They're great. But there's kind of a lot happening on some of them. It can be a little confusing when you're first getting started. So let's just do a blank screen again. And I'm actually, if I click and hold this, I can drag this up right there. And I can actually do that with any of these controls too as well. I can click and drag them and move them around. So if I'm on this screen, let's double click and rename this to our form screen. There we go. All right. Now if I go over here to insert, then I can search for form. There's a new modern form. It's very similar. This is the classic form. Don't ever need to use the display form. I just want to never use that. That is always just displaying information. You can't actually edit or save data with it. So I don't think I've ever even used that one, to be honest. But if we click on edit form right here, we can move this around over here, stretch it out a little bit. And maybe we'll add in a little label and we'll say form screen with the smiley face. Because we are happy people. Okay. Now let's click on our form and go to data source. And now it actually, instead of items, it actually says data source, like our gallery, right? So data source, I can select it right here and say, hey, I want to connect to the task tracker. So this is going to let me display data about a item from our task tracker list. And it also is going to let me save that data and create new items to this list. So that's the key important piece here. So we're going to connect to that. It's going to take a second. And this is awesome. We don't have very many fields, but it added most of the fields, or it added a little bit too many fields. It's got this extra field here. But I can go ahead if I click on edit fields over here. Sometimes you might have lots more fields. I can click on add field. Here's all the rest of my fields inside of SharePoint. I can add those if I need to. And notice it also says what type of field it is. So there's a date picker here. There's a toggle, so there's a true false, right? These are all just those default SharePoint fields, but here's our fields that we're using in our form actually. So we've got priority, control type, and this is really nice because it's kind of creating things for us, right? It's adding all these controls for us, which is why forms are really awesome. But if I go to this control type right here, I can select this, and sometimes I can change the different types. On this choices one, I can either say, hey, you can edit this, or you can't edit this field. So if you want to lock down this field, no one can ever edit this field, you could say view selection, and that way people are just seeing the value here, but they can't ever edit it. So that's something you can kind of do with these. If you go to description, for example, you can see that it's not required. That's coming from SharePoint, so it knows that this field isn't required in SharePoint, and so it's saying it's not required. On the text fields, I can actually give it a little more options here. So I have if this is an email field, I have view email or view phone, and things like that. So that can be helpful. The one thing I also have on this one is edit multi-line text. So if I wanted my description to be a lot bigger and be able to hit enter and type a lot more, I can do that. Rich text is like I'm bolding things and stuff like that. So we don't want to do that necessarily on this one. But let's do edit multi-line text on description. And it made it a little bit bigger and things for us. So that's kind of helpful. And this content type field, right over here, we don't really want that one. So let's click this and hit remove. All right. And now we still have a lot of space. So let's just stretch this out here. And notice how these are kind of getting resized as we stretch out our form. Some of the things that we can do here is with our properties on our form, makes it really easy. So right now we have 3 columns. So there's a column here, and a column here. If I wanted it to be 4, I could do that. Now there's 4 columns per row or 4 fields per row here, so that's kind of nice. So that actually is perfect. So let's do that. I can also choose the layout. All these little things, right? These are why forms are really helpful. That you can create a form to start saving data and viewing and editing data really fast. Customize it real quick, right? So vertical is just the field is on the top, and then the label, like what the field is on the top, and then the entering in the details about that field is on the bottom. Change this to horizontal like that. I think this one works better for this scenario. So there we have that. And there's a few other things that we'll go over, but the next important one, I don't know why it's not on here on this um, this tab, I guess, but it's in advanced and it's also over here, and it is called the item. So that is the item property of our form is just the actual like item that we're wanting to edit or view, right? We can also create a new item, so we'll show how that works. But for this item property, it's saying, hey, when me, the form, is viewing an item or viewing or editing an item, what is that actual item that I'm editing? And so the idea here is we want to be in our home screen. We want to click on one of these items and we want to view that item in the form, right? And so what we can do is our gallery is called gallery one. Okay, so let's remember that. We'll come down here to our form screen and we'll click on our form. We'll go to our item and we'll do this a little bit differently, but for now, I'm just going to say gallery one. And so now I'm looking at the gallery and I just want to see there's a property in the gallery called selected. And that's the item that the user has selected in the gallery. So I can say period. Here's all the properties about the gallery. There, if it's width, the actual items in it, the amount of items in it. That's really helpful. And then this selected item of the gallery. So I'm going to hit selected. Now, just like how I was saying before, the item property, it wants a record of data. So, or the data type is a record. So it wants a record or an item, and which is obvious, it's called item, right? And it also needs all of those fields to be exactly the same as whatever data source I'm connected to, right? So if our gallery was connected to some other table or list in SharePoint, and we said gallery one dot selected, it's not going to work, right? Because all those fields are different, most likely, right? And so that's something to remember. It needs to know, or it needs to be a record, and it needs to be all of those, or all the fields need to be the same. So the data source of the gallery is the task tracker list, and the data source of our form is the task tracker list. So usually those are the same, but that's helpful to remember. And then we're not doing another period, right? We're not getting any more information about that selected item. We just want the whole entire selected item. So if I click on this, we've got, it's getting some of the controls that are inside of there, inside of that gallery. But most importantly, it's getting those fields of that selected item. So that's really helpful. All right. So now we can see that it's pulling in that data. So it's pulled in that item that's selected, which by default is the very first item in the gallery. But let's go ahead and let's get this set up so when we select one of these items, we're actually viewing that item. So if I click on the gallery, there's a couple ways to do this, but the really simple one. So if I go to the gallery, there's an on select property right here. And if I go up to this is just like our button, right? A button has an on select property, which I didn't cover that completely when we were doing our collection, but right, the on select is what happens when you click the button. And this on select of the gallery is what happens when you select the gallery. So when you select the gallery, we are going to go to we're going to use our navigate formula. So navigate just takes us from one screen to the other. So we want to take the user from the home screen to the form screen. So since I've got form screen right here, I can just hit tab. And now if I hit comma, just like PowerPoint, right? When you transition from one slide to the next, you can have different transitions. So we have these screen transitions. So we have screen transition, which has a few different options. So if I hit period, or, oh, there we go. If I hit period, I see those different options. I can select fade. I don't really ever do any of the other ones, to be honest, but I usually just do the fade one. Maybe someday they'll have even more, but I feel like that's the best one, to be honest. So let's just do fade, and we'll close that. So now let's hit play, and let's click on this one right here. So if I just click anywhere on this item, it's also selecting that gallery. So what it's doing is it's saying, the gallery is saying, oh, you've now selected this item, which I've just clicked on. And then it's also triggering that on select property. And it's saying, oh, okay, we're going to use navigate. We're going to go to this item. And now it knows that we clicked on that black pearl ship item, and it's taken us here. So that's pretty awesome. So the other thing that we want to do when we click on the item, go back to our gallery, is we want to put our form in view mode. So let's talk about the form view modes really quick. So these are pretty cool. So if we go to default mode here, right now it's in edit mode. So if I hit play, I can actually like come in here and start typing things, right, and changing stuff. But if I select our form here and I go change this to view mode, there's 3 modes: edit, new, and view. So I change this to view, it removes that ability to be able to edit it. And it looks like it reset it too, which is cool. So if I hit play, now I'm just viewing that information, right? But if I want to be able to edit the form, and the user needs to be able to edit the form, and it's in view mode, what I can do is add in a button. So I'll do a button right here. Click on that. Bring this little button over here, and we'll say this is our edit button. All right. And now we will go to advanced and on select. Again, it's a button. I don't know why the on select property isn't like at the top. Or we could go over here too. So, okay. So what we want to do is use a really simple formula called edit form. And what this does is just puts that mode of the form into the edit mode. So we'll say edit mode, form 1. And that's all you need to do. You just say the name of the form, and then it just puts that form into edit mode. So if we click play, come over here and click on edit. Now it's in edit mode. Now we can add a bunch of stuff to it, right? If you haven't seen this, I'm into Lego. So if you're into Legos and you haven't seen this black pearl ship, it is like the coolest pirate. It is so cool. It's crazy. That's awesome. I'm hoping one day people at Lego will see me and say, "Oh, he really likes Lego. We should send him a free Lego set." That's my goal. One day it's gonna happen. Okay, so now let's go back to our home screen, and then we will click right here, and we'll say whenever they go to that screen, let's just set the form back into view mode. So we'll say view mode, form 1. What am I saying? Oh my gosh, view form, not view mode, view form. Okay, there we go. And by the way, if you want to do 2 formulas, so how PowerUps works is it executes things one at a time. So it's going to do this first, and then it's going to do this. And if you want to separate your formulas, you just use a semicolon. So that's just how you separate out your formulas. So it's going to first set the mode of the form to view, and then it will take us to that form. So that's kind of how that works. And by the way, you can also come down here and hit format text, and that will format it like this, if you're not used to any type of like coding sort of stuff, this can seem kind of weird, but as you get used to it, it actually is a lot more helpful. So I do recommend clicking on that and kind of getting used to how this looks. But we'll go ahead and hit play. We'll click on this train one. All right, now we're looking at the train set. it's back into view mode. We can click edit. And now let's add a little back button. So let's actually just copy this guy, bring this guy over here and say back. And for our on select, we can do navigate, or we can use a formula called back. And it just asks for a screen transition. So we'll just choose the fade one. And what back does is just it takes the user back to whatever screen they were just on. So it's perfect for what we're trying to do. So let play, go back. Now we want to look at this one, click on it. Now we're looking at this one, edit, right? So that's kind of cool. Back and so on. So awesome. So now that we've done that, let's go ahead and let them save the form. So we'll go over here. And we are so close to being able to save some data, which is so fun. Okay, so let's do save. And what this is doing is we're going to go to, well, no, we're right here. All right, okay. So now let's do submit form. And right, these formulas are all very easy. So it's just what it's doing. And then the name of the form. Like this. So how this is working is if I hit play and hit edit and say, hey, you know what? The Harry Potter train set, let's click on a different. Let's say we've got the awesome pirate ship and we click on that and we say, you know what? We have now got this one and it is completed. So let's hit edit, click completed. And if I hit save, what it's doing is it's just going to submit our form. And if it's in if we're currently editing an item, right, it's going to save that item. So and if we'll do a new item next. So if it's in new mode and you hit save, same exact thing. It knows if you're editing an item or you're creating a new item. So it's just going to save it, whether it's one or the other. So if I click on save here, doesn't look like much happens. So we are gonna add a little notification like, hey, you've saved this, and that's kind of cool. But if we go back to our data source here, and now if I refresh this, oh, there it goes. I was a little nervous there. Okay, awesome. So now this is showing as completed. And if we were to check like when this was modified, we could see that it was modified by us. And that's really awesome. So now we're actually saving data and editing editing. Oh my gosh, editing data in SharePoint. Super cool. We can go ahead and go back to our app and we could edit any of these other fields, right? Let's get the new working though now, and then we'll show a little bit more things with the form and adding some notifications and things. So now let's go here and add another button. Boop. Go right here. We'll say new. And this one is, you guessed it, called new form. So we're going to say new form 1. And then we also want to navigate. So I'll do a semicolon. And notice how I can do spaces between these, right? I could do this, navigate, or I could do space, semicolon, navigate. Power Apps doesn't really care about the spaces all the time. So, so let's go to form screen transition fade. Close that. We'll hit play. And now we'll click on new. And now we've got a blank empty item right here. So does anyone have a Lego set? You can put it in the chat if you have a Lego set. I don't know how many people even like Legos. I feel like I'm a big kid, but if you have a Lego set, you can put it to the chat and we'll add it here. But I'm going to say we'll add a couple items. Let's do the Lego castle. And that is very high priority. It's not completed. It's due the end of the month. I really want this one. All right, so Power Apps is smart enough to know if we hit save that we're creating an item, because we turned the form into new mode, so it now knows, hey, we're going to create a new item. we're going to go ahead and click on save. And now, so notice it actually took us back. It took the form back into just edit mode. So we can work with that too. But let's go check our data source again and refresh. And awesome, there is our new item. So we've got our Lego castle. Hi, the due date's not completed. I really want this one. Awesome. We could add attachments. So we don't have to save any attachments, but I'll just show how this can work because it's actually really awesome. If you add the attachments field for SharePoint, here's this. This has some things you can configure and things like that as well. But if you're using this like on a phone, this will actually let you like attach a file or use your camera and take a picture, right? And so that can be really cool. This attachment thing can be pretty cool. If you want to, there's other ways to save documents, right? This just adds it as an attachment to the item. It doesn't like save it to a document library, right? But it can still be super awesome. So I thought I'd show that. We'll go ahead and just click delete here though. So now let's look at our form again. And this time we are gonna look at some of the other properties that it has. Oh, you know what? Oh no, they're not right here. I think some of these should be on this main tab. That's so funny. So it has a couple properties that are really helpful. It has on success. So what happens when the form is successfully submitted? So I could type right here, but just to make sure you can see it, I'm gonna click on this guy, bring our on success property right up here. We're gonna use a formula called notify. And the notify just brings up a little notification and you can have it say whatever you want to say. And so we have the text here is the first thing. So we'll say successfully saved. We'll do a comma. And now we can say, hey, what notification type is this? So what we do is do notification type, do a period to look at all those different notifications types. And we'll do success. And then we can just end it like this, or we can say, hey, I actually want this notification to last 3 seconds. So it does it in milliseconds. So if you want it to last 3 seconds, you do 3,000. We end that right there. And then now we'll go hit play and go back. All right, we'll do new. And no one added any Legos. Maybe I'm the only Lego lover. So anyways, one take. All right, so let's see. Let's do another Lego set. There's a Rivendell. If you like Lord of the Rings, there's a Rivendell Lego set. That one's awesome. Every Lord of the Rings fan should have one, even though I do not have that one. Let's go. This is that day. This one is really expensive. This one, oh gosh, is really expensive. There we go. Okay, so now if we hit save, it's going to bring up that little notification. Successfully saved. It'll last 3 seconds and it'll go away. That's awesome. So if we wanted to, we could also, the best thing to do here on our form is on success, it'll give a notification and it will take us back. Navigate. Well, actually, we could just use back, right? So let's just use back and we'll do screen transition dot fade. We'll hit play. And so one more time, we'll do this really quick. Go hit new. And I'll just type in some random things here. This one's completed. Hit save. Takes us back, gives us that notification. Awesome. So that's a pretty good experience. You'll also notice that this data right here in SharePoint is being refreshed every time we save data. So that's how that works. This is one of the pitfalls that you'll see. There is a formula called refresh, and you just give it your looks like this. You just give it your data source. That will go and refresh the data from that data source that you give it. This is a beginner pitfall, right? This will slow your app down so much. A lot of people that are starting out will, right when they're saving data, whatever it is, whenever yeah, right when they're saving data, they'll use this formula to refresh the data source. And if your data source starts to get pretty big, this can start to take a little while. And how, you almost never need this actually, because how Power Apps works is every time you save data, whether you're editing an item or creating a new item, Power Apps will automatically refresh that data source. So that's why this data got refreshed without us even needing to use the refresh formula to refresh it at all, right? And so sometimes I'll see people that use this formula and they don't really need to, and it ends up making it. Power Apps will go get the data twice, and that can start to slow it down a good bit. Or they're just using it in other places, or they don't need to be using it. And so I wanted to make that clear. So every time you're editing the data source at all, it will go ahead and refresh that for you automatically, which is what it was doing right here. So that's pretty cool. Um, let's go ahead and show just a little bit of more customization stuff you can do with the form. You really can get even fancier with these, but what you can do is if I look at these, what they're called data cards. So I come over here. So here's our form. Here's our data cards. So the data card, there's a data card for each field, and it's basically just a container, just contains all the little things about the field. And how it works is you see this little lock on it, right? So Power Apps does that to say, hey, this form is kind of like it's pre-configured and it's doing all these different things, and it's going to lock it for you so that you don't break it. If you want to unlock it, it then lets you customize it even more. And it kind of just says, hey, are you sure you really want to unlock this thing? We do. So we just, I don't know, let me show that again. So if I click on a card that is locked, I can go over here to advanced and click on unlock to change properties. And some of these are unlocked and some of them are locked. So the actual like field that this data card is pointing to is locked because Power Apps is like, hey, you probably don't want to change that field here. So let's keep that locked down. But if we want to change stuff, we can hit unlock, and now we can change whatever we want. So we could change, is this field required? The update property is, hey, what data is actually updating this field? So right here, it's saying, hey, let me come up here. For the due date, it's pointing to this date picker. So that's saying, hey, I'm going to, when I update or save data to the due date, I'm using whatever is in this date picker. So if you wanted to change that, right, you could say, hey, actually, don't look at the date picker anymore. I want you to always be today, right? And so now whenever they click save, the form will now, for the due date, will always save today's date for the due date. So that, I don't know why you would do that, but you can start to do that with things. Usually I do that with like status or something like that, right? So, or if I'm wanting to, the project manager is always going to be this certain person or something, right? Like you can configure it so it's like that. So it'll always just save that certain value that you want it to. The other thing, or the last thing I can do here, I do want to show that you can actually stretch these out to take up more than just one column. So if you want your description to be longer, you can, let me click on that again. Kind of stretch this out a little bit more if you'd like. And lastly, I do want to show that you can change the display mode. So let's say, like, for whatever reason, you want the user to enter in all these fields, but you don't want them to enter in the due date. So you would go to display mode. And right now, how it's working is it points to the parent. I didn't understand this for so long. The parent, when you use that in Canvas apps, it simply is talking to whatever is the next level above it. So for these data cards, these are all inside of the form, right? So when I say parent, it's really talking about the form. I could literally type in, form one dot display mode, and it would be the same thing, right? So the parent just means, hey, the next level up of this thing that I'm in, so the next level up of this data card would be the form. um, get the display mode of that. So if the form is in edit mode, right, it's editable. If it's view mode, it's view. And so that's how all these little data cards work, is they're all just pointing to the mode of the form. But if I want this one data card to not point to the form, I can instead go right here and just say display mode dot view. And now it's just in view mode. So even if I click back, click on this item, here it is. Even if I click edit, this one ignores that completely, right? Because I've unlocked it, I've changed the display mode. Now it's not tied to the form anymore. So that's a little bit of customization with these forms. The only other thing I didn't really cover, which you might have seen, is the on failure. So if there's ever something wrong, you can do a notification, and instead of right, we did success, you can do a failure notification or something like that, right? They forms usually don't fail, but sometimes you can put, if you're doing a more complicated one, it'll fail, and you can configure that a little bit to let it know that or let the user know that it failed. Let me make sure I've covered. Yeah, okay, I think that's about everything. So now let's cover variables. So variables are so helpful and so important, and they're often not used super correctly inside of Canvas apps. I don't think I was going to say this many times, but I have I have LinkedIn posts that talk about the variables. So I need like a little resource library of just all these helpful things to give you guys. I think that would be helpful. But we're going to cover them pretty simply, and then and show an example of how to use them, um, and then we'll go from there. So let's talk about variables for a second. So let's go back to our home screen. So there are a couple different types of variables, and the reason we want to use a variable is, in the first place, is it's just like a collection. A variable is storing data temporarily in our app, and why that is helpful is it can improve the performance of your app, and it also makes it a lot simpler. So a really basic example of one is, let's add a button right here. So add a little button. If you're ever trying to troubleshoot or just figure things out in Power Apps, adding a button and then adding a label is like the best thing you can do. I still do it all the time. So I'm going to add, and you'll kind of see why. So I'm going to add a button, and on the select property of our button, we're going to show there's the two main types of variables. So the first one's really simple. It's called set, and variables are pretty easy. You just name it. And this one, usually people do GLB when they're naming it at the very beginning to kind of help when you're coming back to your app. You know anything that starts with GLB is going to be a variable. And the reason we do GLB is because it stands for global. When you're using set and you're using this variable, I know this is a little complicated, but we'll cover it and we'll show why these are important. This variable will now be usable anywhere in the whole entire app. So when I do set GLB, I can say user, and let's say I wanted to store the user's information. So this is a perfect example of why this is helpful. I can do user, and that gets the user's information, right? This is the whole record of the user. It's got their email and their picture and their full name and everything. And then if I close our set formula, go like that. And I'll just hold down the Alt key and click on our button. So we've now set our variable. And now, come on, little fella. It wants to stay in. Oh my gosh, okay, that was weird. Sticky keys or something was staying in play mode. That was a little scary. Give me a little heart attack. Okay, so now let's go to our label and do GLB user. And now we can hit period, just like when we're using our user formula, right? So that this stores the record of information about that user. So I'll do period. And now I can say the full name, and here's Ben Fetters, right? Now, the reason why this is helpful is if I need the user's information multiple times throughout the app, which oftentimes I do, right? I need their name or their email or their picture or something like that, right? Um, I can use this variable, which is just temporarily being stored. Power Apps doesn't need to go get this information from a data source or anything. It already has it, and it's just storing that data right here in the app. If I were to instead, like what we did here, use user and use this formula, and I use this formula like everywhere in the app, right? Maybe I'm filtering data off of the user or laying their information in lots of places, then that then that really slows the app down because every time I use this user formula, it's going and getting information about the user. And so the app has to work to go get that information. And so if I'm using this formula 10 places in the app, that makes the app work 10 times harder than if I just created a variable with that user's information and then just referenced this variable, just like we did here, through anytime I need that information, right? So is that making sense? You can do a thumbs up in the chat or do something, um, right? That can be helpful. Uh, this is really helpful to speed things up, make things easier for you. And what I actually recommend doing is doing this right when the app starts. So this formula right here, awesome. Thanks, Carter. You're awesome. Um, and you have a great name. My daughter's name is actually Carter. That's cool. So we go to our app and we go to on start. So whatever we want to happen when the app runs, um, we hit paste right here. And we're going to set that variable to the user's information. So now whenever we need to use this information inside of our app, like right here, we can go over here and say glb user dot full name. And there we go. So now that can be really helpful. This is a really simple example. And it starts to have lots of the things that improve performance and keep things more organized. They seem very small, but then once you're building an app and you have 10 different variables, right? That's when you really start to see the improvements in speed, right? So it's a lot of little things that slow the app down, really slow it down, and a lot of little things that speed the app up, really speed it up. So it's a game of like small changes and things. Um, so let's now show the other type of variable. And I'll actually just delete this right here. We'll do the other type is called update context. And this one, it's a little bit different, right? With the set, we open it, we give it a name, we do a comma, and we just say what the variable is being set to. With update context, it wants us to use these curly brackets. And on this one, when we're naming our formula, we usually start with LOC. And the reason is that stands for local. So these variables only are usable on the actual screen of the app. So you actually can't even set them in the on start of the app. And they're only usable if you create a local variable with update context in the home screen. You won't even be able to reference or even know, the app won't even know about that variable on the form screen, right? So it's only known on the screen that you created. And these are perfect for like showing a pop-up, or just you need to set a variable real quick, you're calculating something, right? And you're only doing that on that screen. That speeds things up because for the app to store this value across the whole app, it needs to work a little bit harder, right? It needs to save this information across anywhere where you go in the app. These variables are only saved on this screen, so they just improve performance a little bit. And they make things a lot easier, right? I'm telling you, when you're starting to build these apps, you're going to have so many variables, especially with more complicated apps. And if you have all of another big mistake I see people make is they always use this variable. I definitely did that too when I was starting out. But that's where you just think about it to say, okay, do I need to use, does this variable need to be used everywhere in the app, or do I just need this variable on this one screen? Um, really makes a big difference with helping with building your app and being organized too, which is really helpful. So we'll say LOC, and lots of times I'll say like show pop up, and then I do a colon to say, okay, I've named my variable. Now I want to set the value of it. And I could just say true and do a end curly bracket and my variable. And for our label here, let's say this is our pop-up. I want to show the label or something, right? I can go to our visible property, which if I turn this off, it just hides the label. If I turn it on, it shows it again. So I'll click on the visible property, come up here and go to LOC, show pop-up. Should have put show label, but we'll say show pop-up. And now if I hit play, I click that, it sets that variable to true, which sets the visible property of our label to true. And now you can see it. And I could have another button to set the show pop-up to false, right? So I can do that as well. So now if I go here and say, now I want to set it to false. Well, now, okay, so now the now the label's tied to the whole variable, and now it's getting reset and everything. Okay, so now, anyway, so we could play with that, or play around with that a little bit more. But that's the general idea of how that works. So if I hold down the Alt key and click that, there it goes. All right. Let me know if this isn't making sense, or if you have any questions on these variables. We can. We'll show another example of using set. But again, you can always send me a message, send me an email, or leave a comment and everything with any of your questions. Let me show how this can be used in our specific example, though. So if we remember, when we click an item right here, in our gallery, we're setting the form mode to view, and then we're navigating to that screen. So the other thing that we might want to do is actually set a variable to the item that we selected. And so I'll explain why we want to do that. So let's first set that up. So we'll come right here and we'll say set, and we'll do GLB, and we could say task. And all I'll do is just say this item. So that's just the selected item. Close that, add our little semicolon. So now when the user clicks on any of these items, it'll set a variable to this item, so whatever item they've selected. And remember, this item, this whole concept is really only, it's mostly just used inside of galleries. So I will say that. Let's hit play, come right here, and we'll go to the Black Pearl ship, click on that. And now, yay, awesome. Okay, thanks for the thumbs up. That's great. So now let's go to our form right here. And remember when we set our item property right here. So we were saying the item that we're viewing in our form is the gallery one dot selected. So we actually don't want to do this, right? Because I was explaining this a little bit earlier. But when we reference a control on another screen, right, gallery one is on the home screen and it's not on our form screen that we're on right now. That makes Power Apps keep the entire home screen in memory. So now Power Apps is like, okay, you're on the form screen, but you're referencing something in the home screen. So now I actually have to remember the home screen and the form screen and keep those both in memory, right? And so that can slow the app down. But the way that we can get around that is by using our variable. So we'll say global task, because this variable it's got the same exact fields as our data source, right? This works. If we looked at it, right, we could compare those. So now this will work exactly the same, right? So I can change the priority to high, hit save, comes back here. Our data source is updated. Now this is high, and I clicked on it again. Oh my gosh. And now this is working great. So that's really helpful. It's also helpful if you are, for some reason, you're coming to this form and you're coming to this form from multiple different screens. Maybe you have a home screen, maybe there's another screen, and maybe you are coming to the form screen from two different galleries and stuff like that, right? Then you don't have to add in any other complex logic, which I used to do when I was first starting. I'd say, hey, if they clicked on this gallery, then it does this. If they clicked on this right? That's super hard. So if we had another gallery showing the tasks on another screen and it still takes them to this form, if you use that variable, um, then that makes it a whole lot easier, right? So that's really helpful too. Um, you can also say like, hey, this is task, and do a and glb task dot title, and like put some details up above the form or whatever you'd like to do, right? The status, or maybe there's a field that you're not displaying in the form and you just want to show it up here, right? Lots of different stuff, lots of ways to use the variable. um, Super awesome. All right. Let's see. Now that we've covered that, the last one I want to mention, and then we'll go ahead and finish with learning the last method of saving data, which is my preferred method. I want to show one last thing. A lot of people don't teach this when they're teaching variables. I really like to teach it. So there's a formula called width, and I didn't learn this formula for like a year or two. Like I don't know why, but it is so helpful. And as you're building apps, you will start to see how different formulas are really helpful. And so I think of, as you learn formulas, it's like you're adding tools into your tool belt. And if it feels like, right, we've covered so many different formulas in this, but if it feels a little overwhelming, just try to have a few formulas in your tool belt, right? Try to just remember a few of these, and you can watch the recording and everything. But as you start to get familiar with those formulas, you'll start to notice when you should use them. So you might not feel that right now, just like with these variables and things, right? You might not think about it as much, but as you keep using the formulas and building the apps, you'll start to say, "Oh, I need to use a variable right here. Oh, I should use this variable, or I should use this formula because I need to do this certain thing," right? So similar. So don't worry if you're not feeling like you know when to use these all the time just yet. But I do want to mention one last thing. So let's go not to the visible property. Let's go to the text property of our label right here. So this one, whenever you hear it, it almost sounds kind of scary, but it really is very simple. And I think of this as almost like another variable, but instead of being on the global level, the whole app level, or on the local level, just that screen, it is on the formula level. So the with formula works like this. We first create basically a variable, um, and we can call it whatever we like. We can say, hey, this is the user info. Um, and then we, just like the update context, right? We're putting it in these curly brackets, we're doing the colon. Then we can say, hey, this is the user's info. This is not the most amazing example because we're using the user's information, but this shows how how the with formula works. Um, and then we close that. So that's the first part of the with. We can create multiples. If you want to create another formula, you can say like the admin info or whatever you'd like, right? So you can add multiple formulas. You just do another comma and add another formula or another variable. But once you've set this up, then you hit comma, and now anything you put here is, you can put whatever you'd like. And now anything you put, we're still in the with formula, but now you can reference this variable right here. So now I could say hello, and then say and instead of user, right, I can say user info dot full name. And I can say and your email is, and then user info again, and this time say email, right? And then I just close the with formula, and we'll stretch this out and I'll say, hello, Ben Fetters, your email is benfetters@peakpowerapps.com. And so this is really, really helpful, right? Because lots of the times you will be building things and you will need info multiple times, but just for that one formula that you're trying to do, just for that one label or whatever it is that you're trying to do. And instead of, right, like if we didn't use this, instead of saying um, user dot full name and then user dot email, right? It's a lot easier to set the variable and then use that throughout the rest of your formula. So you might not need to use this very often, but I did want to show that example. I hope I can go back enough here. Okay. Um, okay, so this is super helpful. I like to just have this in your mind. You don't have to try to use this right now or anything, but just keep it in the back of your mind that this is another option. That one's super, super helpful. I wish I had learned about it a long time ago. This is one of the ones that is very helpful to remember when you're starting out. All right, so let's end with the learning about how patch works. So we are going to go and yes, we're going to create another screen. And this will be we'll call it our patch screen. Patch screen. And the reason I want to show this, I'm going to add a button here. So we're going to need that. Is there's another way of saving data, and it's by using a formula. So instead of a form, we're going to use a formula to save our data. The reason why this is so helpful is it is very, very customizable. And that does mean you have to actually build your form out more, right? The form control, gosh, this one's so nice, right? We built this so fast and we added the form and moved it around and made it look really like pretty decent, right? In a very short amount of time. That's what's so awesome about the form. You can still customize it. You can still do lots of great things with it. But the patch formula just gives you even more control, and it helps you know a little bit more about what is going on when you're saving data. When you have a form that has like 50 fields, it's kind of hard to know what's going on. You'd have to look inside of each little card and everything, right? Maybe you don't have 50 fields, that's a lot, but 20 or something, right? Um, but with the patch formula, everything that's being saved is all inside of your button. So that's why it's really nice. You can also use patch to save multiple items at a time. I won't show that here. We'll show that in the advanced training, but you can save multiple items of data at the same time, right? Like maybe you're doing um, an expense item and you need to save like the the little expenses that are related to it, right? You've got sub items related to your main item or child items related to your parent item. You need to save those. Patch is the way to go. It's so much easier to do it, to do those things with patch and a lot faster as well. So enough talking about it. We're going to keep this really simple. I'm just going to add some labels to our screen here. We're going to kind of build out our form, do a text input, and right, you can start to see how this is going to take a little bit longer, but I'll try to do it pretty quick since there's nothing really fancy going on here. We're just adding some controls. Gonna need another label, and this time we want a date picker. So this will be for our due date, and we need another label, and we need a drop down. So search drop down. And we need a checkbox. That's right. Okay. So we're going to get all these set up right here. Oh, and one more label. So I'll just copy this. All right. So this is really awesome. I really love teaching patch. This is so great. So now we're just going to name these real quick. So we're going to say this is the title and this is the description, which by the way, with these description fields, if you can make it bigger, there's these text input fields have a mode. You can change this to password, which is kind of cool. You can change it to multi-line, and now you can add multiple lines of text instead of just one right here. We've got the due date here. And we've got the priority. Whoa. All right, there we go. And then we've got completed. And we'll change the text to yes. Okay. Or we'll just take that away. Okay. So now let's wire up our little makeshift form here real quick, which by the way, if I click and highlight all these, I can actually let's click and there we go. So if I right click, oh my goodness, why aren't you gonna let me do it, you silly goose? There it goes. Okay, so now I can align this and so if I right click on the control, I've highlighted them, right click, I can align and like distribute these vertically and now make it look even worse. So if you line, you can line these up a little bit better. And this all takes a little bit of time to get this lined up in a good way. But let's get this down here. I think I just made that worse for myself, but usually that's a helpful thing. Okay, there we go. So now let's just get this button to, we're not going to go too crazy here. Let's just get this button so that it will save data. So we're going to come up here and we're going to say patch. And the first thing the patch formula wants to know, you can actually use it in lots of different ways. I won't cover that right now, but I think, again, I have a LinkedIn post that talks about that. But you can do let's just save a new item, right? So patch works by saying, okay, what data source are we saving to? That's the first thing it wants to know. So we'll say task tracker. And now I'll do comma. And now it says it's a little misleading because you can use it in different ways. And so the real thing we want to put right here is it wants to know if we want to do a new item or if we're editing an existing item. So if we want to do a new item, we're going to do defaults. It's a little special formula, and we say defaults task tracker. So that helps patch know that we want to do a new item. Patch is a little more, right? We're doing a little bit more like code or doing a little more formulas and things, but it is really helpful. And maybe you want to just do the form, right, when you're just starting out, and that's totally fine. But I did want to at least show this to know that you can know that this is an option. And now we do our third parameter here. We just do our records. We do our curly bracket. And now we say the title. And what do we want the title to be? I could type in text and just say, hey, the title is always this, right? Or I can point to a control. So I can do text input 4. Oh, that's a good guess. Text input 4.text. The description is text input 5.text. And the due date is the date picker 1 dot. And now this one has a little bit different. It just the date value of whatever you've selected is dot selected date. One thing I'll mention is sometimes I'll see people they don't put the dot text and they just do the name of the control. I think sometimes Power Apps is smart enough to know what you're trying to do, but it's best to just do period and then type in, hey, I want the text from this control or the date or whatever it is. So now we've got selected date. For priority, what we can do here is drop down. Let me actually hit enter here. Well, let's bring that down a little bit. Okay. So priority, what we want to do is the drop down gets to, dot selected. And we want to just do selected because, right, this one's wanting a value. This field is wanting a record. And so when we just say dot selected, it's giving it that record. We could say dot value, but then we'd have to configure that a little bit more. So we'll just do dot selected. And now for our completed, we want check box 2 dot value. And now we'll close our little curly bracket, right? So this is a little bit more configuring, and we'll close our patch formula. We'll hit format text here. And there we go. So now we're we're saving data to the task tracker list. We're creating a new item. And then here's the fields that we're saving. And here's what we're saving to each of those fields. This is really helpful to just see exactly what's going on, right? You're like, what is being saved? Here it is right here. You can see that each field that we've entered is being highlighted down here. So we know we're saving all the fields that we want. If I really wanted to, right, I can add in logic. I can do variables or say, hey, if the user is the manager, then, this field equals this, and all these different logical things in here, right? If I completed, I could say if today equals if a certain date or something, right, it's automatically completed or something, right? The due date is always 7 days from today or something, right? So I could always do something like that and add more logic into here. But let's go ahead and actually just hit play. And we'll say test patch. I can hit tab, which is nice, and say test description. The due date is 24th. Priority. Oh, we didn't get that set up yet. So we'll show that, and this is completed. So the one thing we still want to do with priority, just like we did with our filtering, is we just say choices task tracker dot priority. There we go. So now we're pulling in those, right? So now our patch formula, when we try to save it, we're saving exactly what it wants, right? It needs to be one of those priority options. So now we'll say medium, and we'll click this button. Ran pretty quick. We'll go ahead and go back to our home screen here. And right, even though we're using patch, it still updated our SharePoint list, which still made our data refresh right here. So it's still, the Power App said, hey, okay, you saved to the task tracker list. I'm going to go ahead and refresh the data. Here's your item. So here's test patch. I always click on. Here's test patch, test description, medium, right, our due date completed, and so on. So that's awesome. That's working really good. The last thing we'll do is if we select one of these items, we want to view that in our little patch form, right? So that's the last thing that we want to do. So let's go ahead, and we'll add a little notification too. So let's go ahead and go to right here, and we'll go to our gallery. Now we're still going to set a variable. That's really important with our patch, and especially when we're saving that item, when we're editing that item that we've clicked on. So now we're not going to worry about the view form. Don't need to do that. We're going to go right here and say our patch screen. And that should be great. So let's go ahead and click on play, and we'll click on our Rivendell Lego set. All right, now we're coming here. So now we have to do a little bit more configuring. What we're going to go do right now is now we want to bring in when we click on an item, we're bringing in those values of the patch, right? Or of the gallery item that we just selected. So we want to bring in that variable and say, hey, reference that variable that contains the information about the item that we selected in the gallery. And now let's display that information in these input controls. So we'll go to default to do that. And we'll say, hey, let's look at the global task. I could do gallery1.selected, right? But since we did our whole variable thing, we're going to do global task dot title. And then it pulls in Rivendell Lego sets. That's pretty awesome. So I'll copy our variable name here. Go to default, global task dot description. There we go. We're bringing in our description. For due date, default date, instead of today, we're going to say global task dot due date. For priority, we're going to go to, this one's the slightly more complicated. We're going to go to the default, and instead of 1, we're going to say global task dot priority, and it wants the text value. The default property is wanting the text value of the option, right, of that choice. So instead of just priority, which is a record, it just wants dot value. So it'll actually be the text. So that's medium. Completed. This is, we'll go to default property again. This is a Boolean. So we do task dot completed, and awesome. And now, so this is our save new, and we will copy this button. I'm going to do our save edit. So now we're editing an item. We could configure this more so it knows, if you're doing a new item or editing and things like that. But since we don't have too much time, I'll stop here. So let's do save edit. And now this right here, this helps us know that we're creating a new item. So what I want to do now is say, hey, what item am I editing? I can actually, another great reason to use variables, just say GLB task, and now it knows, hey, here's the item that I'm editing. It knows the ID of that item and everything, right? So when we try to save it to SharePoint, it says, oh, okay, I know exactly what item you're talking about. I'm going to update this item that the variable represents and update it with all these fields and all these values, right? So that's kind of how that works. So let's go hit play. This one is really expensive. Edited. Let's change the date to be overdue and the priority to be high. And let's mark it as completed. And now we'll go ahead and click on Save Edit. All right. Now we'll come back to our home screen. And there we go. So now it's completed. 4/1 is the date. High. You see it's been, oh my gosh, I'm always I'm always gonna do that. And now it's been edited, right? So is this making sense? Is this cool? The patches, it gives you a lot more control. It's probably seeming a little more complicated. I did want to just give you an introduction of that. But if you're feeling like a little more overwhelmed with this, totally don't worry. You can just use the form control for now. You can start to get more familiar with the patch control as you start to build a basic app or two. The thing that we can do here is we can go, right, we can say, hey, notify successfully saved. Same thing we did, except for now we're just doing it after patch, right? Successfully saved, notification type dot success, and we can do 3 seconds, right? So we can do that. That can be really helpful. So now we're going to get a little notification when we edit our item. And then let's get it set up to, just to show the whole full circle here, let's set up our new. So what we can do here is we'll take out this new form. We'll go to our patch screen now. We will take this out. And let's click on new. And so we still have all of this being saved right here. Or we still have all of this being displayed from our variable, right? So let me actually show the slightly, or one of the ways to do this. So this can be really helpful. So we're going to go back to our home screen, and lots of different ways to do this. This is the best way I found, right? You could make sure you're resetting the controls or trying to figure out this logic, right? The easiest way to actually do this, and this is more of an advanced tip, but since there's time, I thought I would share this. We can actually set our variable GLB task, and what we can do is set it to defaults. Task tracker. So this defaults pulls in all the default values of the task tracker list. So basically what it does is it sets a blank task tracker item. And so when we do that, when we hit play, we go here and click new. it changes our variable, which, right, it changes all these things. We might have kept the priority as high. I can't remember what I did for that. But that did blank everything out, right? So that's really helpful. And just like when we right, so when we do save as new, we're using the defaults test task tracker. That's how when we use patch, that's how it knows that we're saving a new item. And so by putting by setting the variable to this, that kind of blanks out everything here. So it kind of helps us create a fresh new form, right? So that's really helpful. You still might want to, it's still a good practice to reset all these controls. And one way of doing that is by saying reset and then saying text input for, right? And then semicolon, reset. So this is one of the way. Oh my gosh, text input 5 and so on. So you could do that. You can do that a little bit faster. There's different methods to just have those all run at the same time, right? The easiest way I've found with these is to actually select all of these controls. So here's our other last little advanced tip here. Um, Come over here and there's a reset property on all of these controls. This does only work with the classic ones though. I'm sad this doesn't work with the modern ones. We come over here to reset and we can actually set a little variable. So I'll actually name the variable here and then we'll create it. So we'll say local reset. So now it's saying we haven't created this variable yet, so it's a little mad at us. So we'll go here to our patch screen, and there's a property of our screen called on visible, and this is what happens when the screen is visible. So what happens when the user comes to the screen? So here's where we can use our update context variable. Go like this, and we can say local reset. And what we're going to do is just set it to false first, and then set it, update context, local reset, and we will set it to true. So it just it sets that property to false and then true again. And that reset property, when it is changed from false to true, just kind of triggers the reset of these controls and just makes them reset. And now that we've created this variable, PowerUp says, oh, okay, I now know what you're talking about when we look at our reset property of these controls. And now this is working, right? So because we only need to do this on this screen, that's also why I chose to use update context, right? Because we don't need this local reset variable anywhere else in our app. We just need it on this screen. So that's how that's working right now. Let's go ahead and go back to our home. We'll click play, click on new. And now there it goes. Now priority is officially being reset down to the default is actually low. Now that I remember that. And so now I can say test and test description. And here's our date, medium. We'll say it's completed. And now finally, the last thing I'll do is we'll get rid of this. And we'll just change this one to save. We'll come over here. And the really awesome thing is, because how I've set this up with the variable, when I set this variable to, when I click that new button, right? And go back to that real quick. When I set this variable to the defaults, and we come over here to our screen, which now that we came, it just reset everything. That's okay. It now knows that it's going to be a new item. And then same when I go back to over here and I click on Rivendell Lego set and I click save, I'm still just putting this variable right here. It now knows that because there's actual data in this variable, it's not like an empty shell. It's not an empty variable, basically. It now knows, hey, there's actually an item in here. I now know when I'm clicking this button, I'm going to actually edit this item instead of creating a new item. So this is a bit more advanced, but it's really, really nice. I actually like teaching this right now because as you if you're starting to use patch and saving things, it's complicated, right? To deal with creating a new item, or if you're editing an item and all these different things, right? So that can be really hard. So that's a tricky thing. So that's hopefully that's making sense. Again, this is recorded, so you can come back and watch this to see if that's really making sense. This is the best way I found to do it. I've done it a lot of different ways of dealing with, are you creating a new item or editing an item, right? This variable just kind of takes care of that. And if you ever need to know, if the user needs to know if you're creating a new item, I can add a label here. And I think I'll end with this. And then I can show some, so I'll end with this, and then I'll show some of my, some next steps you can take to keep learning, keep going on in your journey and avoiding some of the pitfalls and things and doing things with best practices. But what I can always do is I can say if our global task variable, this is for SharePoint. So if this ID field equals blank, so I can just blank, that's that simple little formula. It just says blank. If that's blank, then this is a new item. If not, I can say global task dot title, like that. So because that there is an ID field, this variable does have that. I've clicked on an item. There is a ID field. It's going to say, oh, okay, there's an ID field. This is not blank, so I'm going to go ahead and show the title. But if I come back, let's see, if I come back to our home screen and click on new, now it says, oh, okay, the ID was blank, so now I'm just going to say new item if the ID is blank. So that's pretty awesome, right? So that's cool. That's still how you can kind of show the user, hey, you are creating a new item. Again, I've seen lots of different ways of doing it, and this is the best way I've seen of doing it. This is the most complicated part of the whole workshop, right? So feel free to ask me any questions about this, come back to this in the recording. And I do want to talk about a little bit about the next steps here. So my best advice is to, of course, rewatch this and try to build and do some of the things yourself. I would also definitely recommend trying to build an app for yourself, whether it's your own little task tracker app. Maybe you're tracking certain things at your company and you just want to create a simple little app to help you and your coworkers with things. You can do it just for yourself or just for fun, right? Those can be the best apps that you're just building for yourself because you can learn so much. So that is what I recommend. I will be sending out and putting links to like the formula reference. You can look at all the different formulas. Microsoft has, when it shows the list of all the formulas, it also shows examples of all of them. And so you can start to get more of those tools in your tool belt, which is really awesome to do. And lastly, I do have a training coming up. So it's called our advanced app training. And it's the last week of this month. So I'll just show, it's really cool to show this for just a second here. And I'll include more details. Let me add that to the chat actually. So here's the link. I'll put that just in the chat. You can take a look at how this whole challenge and how it works. But here is the app that we'll be building inside of this challenge. It'll be 5 days. We'll do about 2 to 3 hours a day. It's recorded. You'll have 6 months to be able to access it and really use it. We'll have a lot more Q&A each day. And this is the app that we'll be building. So it's actually a purchase requisition app. We've got a little bit of a dashboard thing going on here. We'll show how to build this slide out menu. That this is, I've messed messed around a lot with menus. This is the best one that I've been able to come up with, and that I've designed, or that our team has designed. We've got different views, right? So we're showing different views. We'll show how to do that, how to do delete confirmations, do pop-ups, show items just for you, do more complex filters, right? So this time we have all, we're filtering on date. We're showing how to deal with some of these delegations and things, all how to do this with best practices. And then we even have a little form that we have. This is really cool. So we'll actually do a whole approval process in the challenge. So we have a basic form that's a tabbed form. We'll be saving multiple items. So we'll show how to save child items. Um, we'll even show a little bit with documents and how you can deal with documents inside of your app and upload documents and things. And I even have a little comment section on here. Again, this is with the collection. This is pretty cool. I love showing this and how you can add this, right? So if you're doing an approval process, you can create a little comment section, date and time it was added, and things like that. So we'll show all of this. This really builds the foundations of being able to build more advanced apps and being able to build them really well and feel confident doing it. I This was one of the things that I always wished I had had when I was starting out. I spent so long. I spent like 2 years, and I've found all these things that I really struggled with, that other people struggled with, and all the best ways of doing it that just make life so much easier. And you can just skip so much of that by going through this app and building things. I put all of the main things that basically every single app has, and I put that inside of this app, right? So that you can learn how to do all the key things that 90% of the apps need to do, right? Dealing with data, all those different things. We even do a little bit of Power Automate inside of the Power app. So you get to see how it all comes together, right? So you get to see how all these advanced tips and things all come together, and of course, give you more access to me to ask me questions and things. My camera will be working during that one. So, anyway, so here's that. Let me know if you have any questions about that. I have the link to sign up for that training in the chat here. I'll put it in some other places as well. But yeah, here's this was a great workshop. Thanks so much for being here. Thanks for dealing with my camera not working and things. So I hope this was really helpful in helping you get started with Canvas apps. Um, Please let me know if you have any questions. Like I mentioned at the beginning, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn or my email. That can be really I can try to help you out with anything you're struggling with, whether from this training or other things. And thanks so much for coming. We'll see you next time, and have a great day. And thanks, Carter. You're awesome, man. Thank you.